right, all right, all right. All right, Black Lion. Haha. We started. Welcome to another amazing session in art. I am, as always, the host of the called and I am her all by myself. Big, and I am calling in from the original unceded lands of the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi people in the territory of Wawiyatanong, otherwise known as Detroit. And I recognize and honor my Igbo African and African diaspora ancestors, communities, and descendants. I am a physician, scholar, scientist, artist, activist, coach, consultant, speaker, mama, and wife. And my personal, professional, and business mission in life is to dismantle white supremacist delusion systems, aka white violence or white terrorism, by eliminating anti-Black racism from medicine, healthcare, public health, and the sciences, all while centering and celebrating Black brilliance, abundance, and joy locally and globally. So thank you again for making the time to be here out there on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and wherever you're coming in from, in the comfort of your home, on the fields, wherever you might be. This is the Anti-Racism in Medicine Action Roundtable. We're actually going to be involving our name Anti-Racism in Action Roundtable because we recognize that ultimately, yes, there is a particularity to medicine and healthcare, but at the same time, this is anti-racism in action in all sectors that intersect with that. And so to keep it all inclusive, anti-racism in action roundtable is where we are involving our too. And who are we? We are a multi-professional transdisciplinary. We cut across all sectors, disciplines, professions, and backgrounds, from doctors, teachers, bus drivers, community members, traders, stay-at-home people, everyone. Community of unapologetically Black and unapologetically pro-Black, liberatory, pan-African, Afrocentric, Afro-optimist, meaning we celebrate and center Black magic, Black brilliance, Black excellence, a future dreaming, Black possibility, strength, brilliance, and all that is possible. And we are committed to developing the innovative knowledge, skills, and attitudes to inform transformative actions towards eliminating anti-Blackness in medicine, healthcare, public health, and the sciences. Our core value is Ubuntu, meaning community. I am because we are. We meet every week, every other week, Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I say that way because sometimes the girls, myself and our wonderful co-creators are doing other things you know, we're coaching. We have all engagements. We have and roundtables around the world. Sometimes they have the nerve to have these things on weekends because it's only 24 hours a day. We get it. And so we may not hold the roundtable at that time. And other times there's the holiday celebration. So, for example, we will not be on next week and following week because of the turkey holidays in the United States, as well as Christmas. And so, and then we'll get started again after the turkey holidays. And then, in a bit, we'll have Christmas, and then in a bit, we'll have New Year. So, on those weekends, we won't be here, but otherwise, we will. And I will always keep you updated on that. We always love to shout out our partnerships. Okay, I love blackpeople.com. At Howard University, USM. Lift up the Canada US Coalition to Embrace Correction in Healthcare. I'm proud to share with my sister and the leader here, Lana James, of Ready for Black Lives. We lift up Black Love Village, lift up Good Medicine Initiative, Ubuntu Black Family Health Center, National Residents Council, Black Mental Health Alliance of Nashville. And we also want to especially lift up Black Oculars, which is a speaker series from Toronto Metropolitan University, led by my amazing sister, Dr. Abdullahi. Myself and Lana were there a couple of days ago. We're speaking on the intersection of Black feminism, artificial intelligence, and race correction. And it was a fantastic conversation. I tweeted that out and the link to the website, and I'm sure they'll post the video and so you can follow. And they're doing just outstanding work there. So I really want to shout out Black Ocular. With that in mind, just a couple of housekeeping before we get into the topic of the conversation today. We are a Jumbotron, aka Dashboard, aka Nest family, baby. And so we cultivate our resources and community on the dashboard. So feel free to always pay attention to that and help yourself to the information that I'll be posting. I'll be posting a couple of things soon, including the link to YouTube. And then also, please tag and tweet the resources and gems we'll be sharing today. Put it on the thread for this piece at the bottom of your screen. At least that's where it is on my screen. Lord knows if Elon Musk took over where it's located now for everybody else. But feel free to do that, and please, hashtag art IMART. Um, uh, and invite folks to the space. We always like to say, listen, bring in your mamas, your daddies, your lovers, your sugar daddies and sugar mamas, okay? Your exes, your kids, your plants and pets. Tag them into the space and let's, grow the space in that way. And again, you can also watch us we're on Twitter Live and we're also on YouTube Live, and LinkedIn Live. So there are various places in which you can see us visually and also engage. So it just kind of diversifies the options for your engagement. Okay. And the other thing we love to do is publicize your work. So if there is, okay, there goes Mr. Lana, I'm going to go ahead and invite her up. If there is work that you are doing, there is a publication, there is a project, there is a program, there is a promotion. You know, we love alliteration up here. Yeah, okay. So you got a program, project, product, a promotion. We like to go ahead and disseminate. We like to go ahead and celebrate and lift you up. So go ahead and let us know. Post that on the Jumbotron, send DM it to me, and I'll happily, celebrate again. Ubuntu is all about Ubuntu. Okay. So with that being said, let's get into it like only we can, baby. All right. I am just honored to have with me here the amazing, the illustrious, the peerless, fantabulous Dr. Sunny Nakai, baby, and she would tell you some of what she does, baby. And of course, we have the phenomenal, my sister, my right hand, my better half, Lana James, who will soon be jumping on, representing, the other side of the pond of this continent, which would be Canada. And she really breaking it down from that perspective, as well as the multitude of the perspectives she brings to the conversation. And what is the conversation? What is the conversation? All right. And we are having a conversation about bias. Now, y'all, I'm sure have been filled to the brim about bias, right? What is it? Implicit bias, implicit bias. If I hear implicit bias, at this point, I tweeted this a while ago, and I say it again. Implicit bias is a trigger term for me. Now, I hear implicit bias. I don't know, my goosebumps, tachycardia, meaning fast heart rate for my non-clinical people. All right. Tachypnea, sharp breathing. I go cold and I got to leave. I have an instant flight response, okay, to the word, to the term, the combination word implicit bias. Because, we're going to get into it. We're going to get into it. But my sister here wrote a phenomenal publication. She called it Bias Breakers. Okay, bias breaker and really addressing bias when it comes to admission and selection. But we're having a broader conversation because we see the opportunity beyond just first of all, healthcare, medicine, and the training system. But we also see an opportunity. Frankly, this is applicable across multiple sectors and in many spaces. So we really want to unpack, what this whole bias, implicit, explicit, what have you, right? Piece. What is it? What do we get wrong? Okay, why do people like me have a trauma response when we hear this term, right? What do we get wrong now? The way we engage around, quote unquote bias in our various institutions. Why is it problematic? What is an appropriate approach to the topic? Because it does have a place in the overall anti-racism, discussion, obviously, right? And then how do we break it, right? How is Dr. Nakai and her team recommending that we break it, and why is that important? Why is that important in any field? Why is that important in any setting or sector or institution that we may find ourselves in, right? We want to talk about those things. My curiosity, my biggest curiosity, is that ultimately, because Dr. Nakai's paper was also entitled "Bias Breakers: Continuous Practice for Admissions and Selection Committee," and immediately my mind went to, well, they're trying to. What is the question they're trying to answer? What's the problem they're seeking to solve? And in my mind, the loudest one should just be representation. The issue of underrepresentation by design. I always add that part, right? The unrepresentation and underrepresentation of, whether it's, folks of color or Black folks specifically, right, is by design. This is not an accidental when you're now, when people are born. No, baby, it's by design. And so, um, how does or how do these bias breakers answer that problem, right? And that's the connection that I really want to get into on today. And hopefully you do. So go ahead and DM me and figure out what your thoughts are about, and comment if you are in LinkedIn, if you're on YouTube, if you're watching on other platforms. Use your comment section. What is your understanding of bias, and what are your frameworks or your approaches to breaking them? And how do you see that relationship as it relates to representation? How do you see that relationship? I'm curious about your take as we engage in this conversation. So to get into it, let's start with our introductions. I want to bring in Dr. Salina Kai. She is a phenomenal sister, friend, colleague, peer mentor. I learned incredible, just everything from her. She leads the Equity Matters Fellowship at ACGME. That's the accrediting um, Council for Graduate Medical Education. That's the body, the regulatory body that makes or breaks your residency program. If ACGME says, I don't think so, you don't get a residency program. The whole reason we have doctors right now is because they got to train through an accredited residency program. Okay. And for you to have that program accredited, ACGME are the people that do that. So this is a bad mama jamma right here, leading the fellowship of Equity Matters, and which I'm honored to be one of the inaugural fellows, and which we completed and will be showcasing in a month our work. But you know, she's no joke in this position, and it's really critical. They play a critical role when it comes to representation, right? In terms of the power position that they occupy in the ecosystem of healthcare education and training. So I want to introduce my wonderful sister, Sonny. You better tell the people why you are divine and awesome and brilliant and beautiful and everything great, and like the work you do. You are also vice dean at your institution, and very well published in a lot of medical education spaces, and just a phenomenal speaker as well. And in fact, I think this morning you were engaged in trauma informed training for leadership. That's going to be another A mark. We're going to definitely bring you back to discuss. I mean, I was so intrigued when I heard that. So, and we also were exposed to some of that training in the fellowship, and it has really changed my life, both professionally and personally, I have to say. So, with that, I'm turning over the mic to you just to do some introductions and your joy celebration this morning. That's just what we're going to talk about right now before we go on to Lana. The mic is yours, sis.
Okay, so I unmute both, right?
Sis, you're either muted or your volume is really low. But I'm
Okay.
gonna mute on both devices so you can unmute on both devices.
Okay. How's that? Am I okay? I'm gonna make sure I turn
You
this
are
on.
great on Twitter, but I don't think you unmuted your computer.
Okay. So I am unmuted on both. Can you hear me on the computer?
I cannot hear you on the computer. I can only hear you on the phone.
Let's see. My volume on my computer is all the way up. That's weird. Speaker.
Okay, don't worry. Keep going. I'll just unmute on the computer and hopefully they can hear you. Okay.
Okay, cool. So good morning. I'm Sunny Nakae. I do want to talk for a second about just in my introduction about my identities. I think it's an important equity practice to talk about what identities I'm bringing into this space. I love AMART. I am unapologetically pro-Black. You cannot be anti-racist unless you're pro-Black. You want to fight me on that? Go ahead, but you're wrong. I am on my mom's side, I'm seventh generation European American immigrant from Western Europe. My dad's side, I'm fourth generation Japanese American. So actually, right now, I'm in Sacramento, about 40 minutes from my family's orchard. It's called Twin Peaks Orchard, and that is where my family settled in this country. Lots of stories, but it is sacred ground for me to be in a place and space that my ancestors started, and it's still in my family. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of, there's a lot of challenges. My family was incarcerated for 3.5 years during World War II as American citizens. And so I take with me the legacy of it's our responsibility to enact justice. And I take that from my family of origin. And, my life's work aligns very well with Dr. Opara's in that, I'm focused on access and equity in medical education and healthcare. That's what I want to do. That's what I do every day. And personally and professionally, that's what gets me up in the morning. And I never get tired of talking about it. I never get, I never get tired of doing it because it's just so, so important. But I do want to acknowledge the privileges and, I grew up very performatively white. And so some of my friends, but I identify as a woman of color, and it's been interesting to figure out how I see myself versus how the world sees me, and understanding aspects of privilege, and understanding white performance in terms and white adjacency and some of those elements. And so bias is in particular very interesting to me. One, because full disclosure, I do not like implicit bias, unconscious bias, all that. I'm just like, I have to manage my face when people talk about, we're going to do bias training for our admissions committee. And I'm like, whatever. It's going to be like a one-off thing. So it does not engender accountability, which is what we really need for change. So we're going to talk about that more, but this training was actually born out of my frustrations for all the bullshit bias stuff that's out there, because it is not helpful to tell people, well, that's how your brain works and it's okay that you have biases. No, it's not. It's not okay. And our brains work that way. And next, what do we have to do to fix it? And I also want to talk a little bit about how this individual bias work obscures structural bias in ways that are even more insidious and keep us from really being able to break down those pieces. So other identities I'm bringing into the room. I'm also a parent of 3 wonderful, depending on the day, teenagers, brilliant teenagers. I have an amazing partner who I just have to shout out to that has been holding it down. I've been away from home. This is my 10th day away from home. So I have a partner at home that shows up on the regular and supports this work as much as I do. I'm a dog mom also. I like to bake. I'm a humanist, secular humanist, lover of all people. And I'll stop there. I'm going to hire Dr. Opara to be my intro person if I ever have a gig, because she's the best intro ever.
Oh, you are too much. I'll wait for you to mute so I'm not feedbacking. Okay, you're too much. And listen, look, we always need a hype woman, hype man, hype gender non-binary person. We just need hype people in our lives, baby, because the world is not built for us. So look, it's already hard enough, and there's nothing like just having somebody in your face saying, you're everything, baby. Yes, you are. You do, because the world is not out here for that. So it is my pleasure if that's the only service that I give to my community, baby, I am owning all of it. So thank you for that amazing introduction and for always reminding us of the equity practice of naming our positionality in the space that we are in, because that is the lens that we bring to any conversation or interaction or dynamic. And it's a wonderful equity. I learned that a lot of that from you and observing the way that you do that beautifully in the spaces that you occupy. So thank you for that. And speaking of, multiple identities and positionalities and just a polyglot with the amazing divine ability to hold multiple perspectives and weave it into a beautiful tapestry of knowledge, it's the one and only Lana James with her just amazing that's right. We snaps, clap, get that emoji in the ear. That's a thing I didn't say, y'all, but y'all, we do emojis up in here. You better be putting up emojis and clapping as Lana gets up in the stage. My wonderful sister from the Canadas, Turtle Island, and who's here always to just break it down for us. I mentioned we were at a conversation as part of the Black Ocular Speakers series, and I can tell she gave such a dissertation on the difference between data and information. I don't know how many of y'all think about that. And so the things, oftentimes we use them interchangeably, but they're not the same. And there's a reason that they're not the same. And it matters that we know the difference because of the ways that it is used inside of an overall unjust system. And so I'm really grateful for that recent, just like, I'm always excited when I learn something new. I'm one of the most excited people when I learn something new because it's such a reminder to value life and being able to get up each day. Because I get up each day and you learn something, you're like, God darn it, like, yes, that no one more new thing. And so, Lana, thank you for teaching me that. But go ahead and teach the people about the divinity that you are and your greatness on this morning. Remind us. We just always got to remind people every week. And so welcome to this space. You've been doing a lot of work, and I haven't gotten a chance to actually catch up with you because last week you were doing a lot of work in houselessness and folks were getting evicted, and there was just a lot of housing injustice going on that you were being part of. And I apologize, I was supposed to follow up with you on that. And how is that going, and where is your joy on today as you reintroduce yourself to us? Go ahead, sis.
I'd like to say good morning and good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Again, I agree with Sunny. You are the best hype person. I was just like, oh, I wonder who the other speaker is. Oh, my Lord. You got me for a minute there. So I'm Lana. I'm coming to you from the ancestral and treaty territories of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation and the ancestral traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Huron-Wendat nations in this fair city called Takaranto and anglicized to Toronto in the province of Ontario and the disputed territory of what is called Canada, and to our southern borders as New York and the state of Michigan, for those of you who are not familiar with Canada's geography. So I will just go back. In terms of the houselessness issue, we have a wonderful group called the Supportive Housing Justice Network, who have been working tirelessly. The majority of folks are from the front lines, and they have been trying to hold it down. It has been a very difficult period for decades now, but particularly over the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic, because the city of Toronto is being forced through a process very similar to what has happened in LA and very similar to what historically happened to New York when they wanted to gentrify every corner and turn it into a shiny multi-million-dollar residence. So the war on the poor, the financially intentionally disadvantaged, has been escalated to a new level, such that the housing and shelter spaces every year have decreased, while political rhetoric about 16,000 houses here and whatnot. And I just want to give you an example of why I say rhetoric, because when they talk about affordable housing in Toronto now, they mean that you need a minimum income of $100,000. And that's a minimum income. So if there's two of you and you can pull that off, then great. But, that's not how the world generally works these days. And so that's often the entry point in the affordable housing. And it goes up from there. And so this is a war on those who have been intentionally economically disadvantaged while the economy continues to restructure itself out of the avails of transatlantic slavery incomes. And so those of us who are in different places, different spaces, who have moved from our front lines to other front lines, have been doing our best to help bring attention and pressure. And because we continue to be under the onslaught of the GOP coming north of the border, our premier is currently enlisting that is not only part of their party and their party politics, but the same mechanisms that have been unloaded across the United States are being leveraged here by actually the exact same players. For those of you that are following the tribunal happening in our country in Ottawa for the truckers convoy and the Prime Minister of our country, you will hear very similar problems that came up on January 6th. Happening here, and many of the folks who helped organize January 6th were the ones who helped organize it here, getting in the crossfires. I would say a number of, and giving nobody excuses, but I'm going to say a number of white Canadians who didn't even know I hit them because they brought another level of like white supremacy up from South. And that's why several weeks ago, back in February, when we were on Twitter space, people were like, but I thought it was Canada. Why am I seeing the Confederate flag? And I had to explain, well, your white supremacists have come north of the border to try to enlarge in white terrorism and stoke their white Canadian so-called milder counterparts into more violence. And so the reality is that these things go together. White supremacy has always used economics to incite working class whites against other people and weaponize rhetoric to create a culture and an atmosphere of terror. And so that terror is always targeted at people that they want control over. And in this case, they want control over folks who can't afford to live an unaffordable lifestyle, and that who have to seek out shelter. And I want to point out that many of the people who are in our shelter system are working people. When I say working people, everybody works. It's called occupation. Whether capitalism can draw money out of you or not is a different story. And I'm also referring to that more standard kind of work, clocking in somewhere. Many people are working not only a job, but multiple jobs, but cannot afford the standard of living within the Toronto GTA area. And we're talking that a bachelor apartment that is less than 500 square feet is on average $1,600 upwards, not including any of your hydro or any of that other stuff. So just take that into stock. And so, yeah, we've been throwing everything at it. Everybody we know, me included, is throwing everything at it. Anybody we know, just can somebody send a letter to the city council and can somebody do something? Because we have people that die in the streets as a result of extreme cold. And people actually die more during that transitional cold because you think you can survive it, right? Sometimes you think you can make it through the night, and it's the most dangerous time because when we have clear below human freezing temperatures, everybody kind of knows what to do, but it's in that in-between space where we actually lose the most fingers, toes, and lives. And that weather is upon us. And we had hotels, spaces opened up that got, lots of benefit from the state government that were housing underhoused and sheltering people who are now going to be turned out into the streets starting December 1st. And so that is what we're all feverishly trying to stop because, like I said, I wasn't raised. I will never be okay with walking over somebody. I will never be okay with that when there are thousands of real estate square feet available. And this place, the first peoples of this place we call Canada, always have welcomed everyone, provided them shelter and food, even when they were hunted almost to death and had genocides performed against us. They still remain and have spaces for how many settlers who don't even give them any respect. So this is a place of plenty. So the idea that anybody should be underhoused and underfed is criminal because the people who actually own this place, who never gave up their responsibilities of stewardship, if you will, deeds to the land, speaking metaphorically and literally, didn't do that. So who are these people, as Elder Kevin Deere says, who are these fiat governments on these territories to do such a thing? And so I just want to remind us that we have to really check for folks because we have an awful right-wing political thread running across the world. And it's right-wing, whether it's in democratic language or conservative language, or as we call it here, we have conservatives and we have liberals. It doesn't matter. To be to the right has always meant to be only for those who are for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care what political party you're in, because they just switch up their names, but the policies remain the same.
The policies
so I don't want anybody to
remain
think
the
that
same.
it's me one. It's not me one. It's just the Shelter Housing Justice Network who is holding it down. I mean, literally, there are members who are literally spending every paycheck to feed and just get things done. So I really want to big up not just the Shelter Housing and Justice Network here in Toronto, but the different versions of it across Canada, across the US, and across the world, who understand that we all have a right to be housed in this great mother called the planet Earth, who has given us everything, and to whom only the most unhealthy of minds and political systems choose to deny what has been offered freely. And what is my joy today? My joy today is I connected with, I would say, my best friends across my life course. And I'm going to give a shout out to Randall Reeves. And we had a great conversation today. We haven't had a chance to catch up in forever. And he is the African-American brother right in your hallowed city, Detroit. We've known each other for some
Detroit?
time. Yeah, I won't say how long, because that might age me. But it was wonderful to catch up with him today, and he put a smile on my face, because we went back in time, back to undergrad. He's a bit older than me, so he was doing things before me, but he was great in showing me the ropes. And he does data, he does law, he's a lawyer, and he does amazing things with digital networks. And so it was just great to connect and just remember back in the day, and what comes next. So I will say that. And for my other descriptors, I co-lead Ready for Black Lives research, evaluation, data and ethics for Black populations. I also chair the Black Bioethics Reference Group. I am the postdoctoral fellow of AI medicine and data justice at Queen's University. And those are some of the hats that I wear. But the most important hat is as a liberator of myself and all that I am in touch with that might come under the auspices of what we call the ugliness of violent capitalisms and colonialism, so that we might actually, get to live right, be with each other, be in communion, because we have everything. We just have a whole shitload of political regimes and business people trying to convince us that we need to buy what we already have. And so I'm just about keeping it real. That's me for now.
We need to buy what we already have. That's that abundance mindset right there, right? I'm a liberator of myself first. I love that. Thank you, Lana. And then, the rest of my peoples. And if folks want to come alongside as co-liberators, they're welcome, but they are co-liberators because they need to liberate themselves as well. And we can then do this together, because ain't nobody coming to save us. We save ourselves, we heal ourselves. So I appreciate, as always, the dissertation that you drop. And shout out to Shelter Housing Justice Network for doing what you do, and all our mutual aid organizations and community-based organizations, all our grassroots organizations that are almost always, mostly, generally led by Black women, Black femmes, Black queer folks, Black disabled folks. And just want to lift you up for all the work that you're doing. We can't do the work that we do on our end without the work that you do. I want to always just lift that up. Okay. I just appreciate you. You all are the leaders. We just are following your lead, and I appreciate what you do as our mothers, our fathers, our grandpeople, our aunties, our uncles, our binary relatives. So housing is a right, and housing is health, and that's just facts up in here. And Dr. Nakae, as we get into it with you and your work and your publication, I want to tie in some of the themes, in what Lana was dropping. It is 100% related to the conversation today. Okay. And for me, the ways that I connect them, right? And she said something. She said she named the ways in which white supremacy or white supremacism or white terrorism, white violence, people in our roundtable community have called it different names to just really disrupt any sort of reinforcement of the belief that white folks are actually superior, and really just naming that it is a delusion and an illusion for oppression. And so, but really naming the ways in white supremacism, right, creates the conditions that produce poverty, right? That creates the conditions that produce houselessness, creates the condition that inform the scarcity of, or produce or manufacture the scarcity of resources for certain folks to not meet the requirements to be admitted to medical school or any other professional school or any other opportunity out there. Create the conditions that produce the mindsets of the people in the positions to say yay or nay to candidates, right? Create the conditions that produce and inform the individual and structural, I love that you said that, biases that are barriers to achieving adequate and appropriate representation. Okay, it's the same root cause that we're talking about here. And I want to pull out a section of your article, which I love, which is right in the beginning of the article. And it speaks to something that you did already say in your intro as we get into the conversation part. So, excuse me while I read this excerpt. Quote, many medical schools, and I'd love to invite folks to, you can insert any institution in there. It could be many schools, many organizations, many institutions, many businesses, corporations. Look, you can pretty much insert any institution there. So many will say institutions have implemented standalone or annual training experiences that generally take place during the onboarding of committee members. And so committee members are those admissions committee, you can say hiring or promotion and tenure committees, again, fill in the blank. These bias trainings are often delivered as a didactic workshop focused on general aspects of interpersonal unconscious bias and do not address the structural biases in the admissions slash hiring slash promotions, etc. process. Okay. One-time training does not typically employ active engagement in bias recognition as applied to the context involved. A continuous learning pathway to support a culture of bias recognition also tends to be lacking in typical bias training. To achieve more equitable admissions outcomes, committees, groups, organizations, institutions must continuously engage in the recognition of biases and practice a culture of bias mitigation. End quote. So, Dr. Nakae, let's level set. What is bias? Let's just start from the very, very basic, because we have a mixed crowd. Folks are coming to this conversation from different places, and folks are coming into the conversation with different definitions of bias. And so, what is bias according to you as you use it in your work? And why do we need to break them, especially as you lay this background that I just read out? The mic is yours, sis.
So for bias is a leaning one way or another, right? It is what we've learned from neuroscience. It's how our brains work. Our brains use context clues to fill in the blanks based on patterns or things that we've understood in the past. And so bias in and of itself, and this function of our brain is actually serves us for survival, right? We start to learn rules and functions and patterns and identify information largely because we have a great threat detection system, right? My colleague Kimia Saraf we have a state-of-the-art threat detection system for both social belongingness and physical survival. So the way that our brain identifies these patterns refines that threat detection system. In this context, we're going to talk about bias in the context of power, right? So bias without power is an opinion or a leaning one way or the other. Bias with power is oppression, right? Is a way that people can influence systems, others, and be in decision-making seats that actually allocate resources, opportunity, and hand down judgments that create oppression or that create inequality, inequity, exclusion, and actually hurts the entire core of humans, right? So there are people who are inherently missing from the table, from seats at tables, from decision-making bodies that create this kind of oppression. So it really, bias matters so much more when we have power or influence over something, over someone, over a system, over a policy. And very often we have to use this strategy. What are the skills and strategies to help our brains function optimally, knowing that they have this proclivity toward bias, right? So our training was really born out of, what does bias sound like when it shows up? How is bias baked into how we do things every single day? And how can we continuously remind ourselves that our brains are flawed in these ways and use our collective wisdom on bias recognition and mitigation to keep ourselves on track? So it's almost like collectively we can put the bumpers on the bowling lane, so keeps us, a little bit more toward the center. It's not maybe going to be perfect, but it's going to be better than if we hadn't given it thought or created structures that help normalize talking about what biases are coming up and how that's influencing our decisions. Our goal is never to eliminate it, because we can't. It's how our brains work. So that's what pissed me off the most about all this unconscious bias stuff, was just like, well, it's how your brain works, and go on your merry way with your flawed brain, right? And I'm like, but my flawed brain is hurting people and has the potential to create rules and norms and structures that actually hold people back, that are the opposite of what we want to do in this larger human family. So creating tools that normalize how our brain work and go the next step of saying, what are the things that we need to do to continuously engage to keep this thing called our brain and the collective brains that would be at any given seat or body or in institution on track. And turns out we can build systems that help us recognize those biases, that create safeguards to keep us on track toward equity, because this is about equity practice, this is about representation, and it's ultimately about justice.
And that's on period, right? Ultimately, it's about justice. It's about equity. This is about representation. And ultimately, this is about justice. I couldn't have said it better myself, as always. I love it. Dr. Nakae, and then I'll have Sister Lana sort of react to what you said. But if you could do two things. One is to give an example of individual bias, and then what is structural bias. And folks, sometimes those terms can be kind of abstract. And so when we talk about individual bias, and in this context, I want to keep it still in the context of admissions, or making decisions about who gets what, right? Allocating resources and opportunities, assigning value. So what is an example of individual bias? But then how do folks understand the difference between that and structural bias? And I would love for you to also give an example of, okay, how did you showcase this is what bias looks like? So you're going to tell us that, like, individual and structural, but then what is the mitigating strategy, an example of a mitigation strategy that you propose? Because I understand from the workshop that you propose different scenarios and then gave sort of customized mitigation strategy, so that it wasn't just like this is. So always be asking yourself, this sort of global type of, like, always be like, oh, my brain. No, like, but rather, in this scenario, this is what you do. And I really loved that was one of the approaches that you took. So showcase for us, this is what individual bias looks like, this is what structural bias looks like, and then showcase for us what are an example from your workshop that you propose as specific bias mitigation strategies in the context that we're speaking.
Great question. So for individual bias, I'll give an admissions example and then a non-admissions example. So in an admissions example, when we're selecting people, maybe hiring, we might have a pro bias towards schools that we consider fancy, or that we've heard in our common vernacular are associated with elite, right? I might think this person's from, let's pick on Harvard. This person's from Harvard. They must be better than the person over here who's from Missouri Valley State or Utah Valley College or whatever, right? So I may not actually have grounded information or data, right? I'm just using a shortcut of what I've heard around the hierarchy of colleges. One is more familiar, one is more, it has more notoriety. And so I automatically assume, as an individual decision maker, that it's better. Baked in structural bias would be to allow individuals from certain schools in your flow of how you screen applications to be elevated, to add points to students who are from Harvard, to create some sort of systemic preference. Or I can do it even more insidiously, and I can say, I'm creating a cutoff around what your GPA has to be or what your entrance exam score has to be, thereby eliminating a lot of people who are not from these well-resourced elite places, right? Another example that I could give is bias against individuals who are using food assistance programs in our states, right? People might have all kinds of beliefs and stories they tell themselves about who ends up on food stamps or, SNAP, any of these other, whatever it's called in your state. And you have different beliefs about that person's work ethic, the choices that they've made, how intelligent they are. Like those kinds of things are baked in that are biases. People who are on food assistance are not as good as people who are not, right? That is a bias that exists within society. But a way that this gets baked in structurally is that the rules for how you can use that food voucher are not equitable. I can't buy a prepared birthday cake in most states with my food voucher because there's some sort of story underlying the people who made those rules about being deserving, right? So as a parent, someone who's on food assistance, someone decided that parent is less worthy of being able to provide their child a bakery birthday cake than someone who's paying with another form of compensation to that grocery store, right? So that is how value judgments, the person at the table is deciding how these rules work, how this resource is metered out based on these elements of bias that are baked into a system. So some of the ones that we've gone through, we've tried to go through and actually specify and name different types of bias. Name bias being one of them, affinity bias being one of them, time crunch being one of them. So let's pick name bias as one that we've talked about being able to identify. What does it sound like? It sounds like, I can't pronounce this name. What a weird name. Good thing that's not on the door. That's not going to fit on a white coat. Let's just call this applicant J. Here's the actual comments that Dr. Palermo, by the way, shout out to Angel Palermo, my co-author, and then all of her student, Mary Sun from Mount Sinai, who did our data crunching and analysis, and the two students from my institution who actually did our original artwork for the session. So Tammy Law and Ruhi Biakod. So love to everyone who worked together as a team effort to put this together. So within that name bias example, when we have actually heard these things said in our committees, right? So we took real comments of these things where, that moment where you look at maybe one other person across the room or maybe just to yourself and go, how is that fair? So name bias immediately creates distance. It others candidates. And when we perceive something as different, we very often perceive it as less. So what are the fixes to name bias? We can have someone be our chief pronunciation member of the committee, and they're responsible for pronouncing the names. Anybody pronounces it wrong, that person just corrects them. That's their job. We can use initials for all candidates instead. We can make sure that we affirm and work hard to pronounce names correctly and have someone keep us on track for that. And it matters because we have data that shows that names that sound different or names that sound tied to specific cultural traditions, applications from those groups are valued less than applicants around. So now we're back to the white supremacism and the white preference and all of those things. So we have to do specific things to keep our brains on track. And turns out we can put these structural pieces in place to remind ourselves and to have someone say, it's not okay to rename an applicant. We're going to try harder. And then we can even do things like at interview day, collect phonetic pronunciations of names. So when we end up discussing them in our final committee or our final search section or our final HR meeting, we actually can say their names correctly and put effort and time and energy into restructuring how we even talk about people. And all of these things added up, little things like name bias and time crunch and affinity and zero risk, like all of these things that we can add up can make a big difference across the systems that we're using to actually broker opportunity and resources.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Just even, and I see, let me make a couple of things. Michelle Schutz, hi and welcome. So we take a little bit in terms of the format of our roundtable. We take a little bit of time amongst ourselves to, the folks at the roundtable to have our discussion. And then we open it up to audience. So I see you're requesting, and I will announce when it's time for that. So just a heads up there. I also want to shout out a few people in the audience. Dr. Pascal Guiton, just amazing, powerful sister. The phenomenal Dr. Bonnie Simpson, a bad Mama Jama, a goddess in all her melanated glory. Okay, up in this space. Brother Bobby, always amazing, always an outstanding brother, so incredibly supportive. Sister Helena, just amazing, powerful woman. Sister from UK across the pond. Just want to shout out Dr. Day, another phenomenal goddess, just bad. These are people that are just like creating all kinds of good trouble where they're at. I just really, I'm in awe of their awesomeness. Dr. Brian Leva was here earlier, had to step away. He may come back in again, but just shout out to everyone that makes time to be here every single time. Sister Phyllis, and the list goes on. If I didn't shout you out, consider yourself shouted out. Okay, Sister Anita, strategy, just powerful people doing great things. And I just appreciate you all and just want to celebrate you in this moment. Thank you. Keep again posting and tagging and commenting. And in you out there in YouTube land, in LinkedIn, wherever you are on your platforms, we celebrate and love you. Black people just shining brightly and just being the divinity that you are. So thank you, Dr. Nakae. Oh my God, you brought out so much, especially when you pick name bias. Oh, you know, you already activated a sister with that. Sister with the name Ijeoma Nodim Opara. You already know that there was some activation going on in there. Okay. Yeah. And on Zoom, I took to in some spaces, started to actually put the phonetic spelling of my name. And still people will be like, I hear me or whatever the hell people did. And so there are people, they can spell English letters and can spell phonetics. We're out here assuming people know how to use phonetics. The same people who can spell probably can't use phonetics. So it's just like what it is, and I'm like, I understand. How do you go from ink, India, inside to idioma? Like, I don't get it. Like, how is this I messing you up so bad in the beginning of a consonant? I'm confused. So I'm saying all that to say that, yeah, the name bias is real. We have tons of literature that shows that non-English name, if your ass is not Chad Williams, or I don't know, Kaylin Dombrowski, you get points deducted, invisibly, right? You are somehow lazier, less worthy, less valuable. It's a whole thing. Don't be Ijeoma Ugochukwu, Kofi Annan, okay? Don't be Shaniqua Johnson. Don't be Nana. Don't be Raheem, Mohammed, because immediately points deducted, right? And so these are very real things that you lifted up, which I appreciate. You also reminded me of an article, Dr. Nakae. Do you remember this article? I think was published in the American Journal of Surgery. It had to do with, it was a surgery team that looked at this, of course. I mean, that's my bias, and I'm standing with that. But it was a surgery team that did this so-called research where they showed an association of credit scores with being a quote unquote good resident. Do you remember that paper? I'm going to look it up and look for it and post it on the dashboard, with the conclusion that we should probably be using credit scores as part of admissions. Y'all. So when you talk about the importance of understanding what structural bias, and again, thank you for really laying the foundation. Bias plus power equals oppression, equals violence, equals all the rest of it. Yeah, we all have bias to this. We like chocolate ice cream more than vanilla. We have bias like that. We're talking about the bias that kills. All right. The bias that is produced by a repeated exposure to white supremacist messaging over years and generations, filtered and woven throughout every thread line of society, in the media, in healthcare, in education, in housing. Okay. This bias doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is produced, it's fed, it is reinforced, and is expressed and activated, having real life consequences as a result of a structural system of power, asymmetry, and imbalance that lives inside of white supremacism. It's so important that we link all of these things, because this is how it works, this is how it's experienced, and this is how it expresses itself and has the impact that it has. These are not benign, cute things. Oh, I like the Atlanta Braves versus the Detroit Lions. And to be honest with you, I don't even know what sports groups I just referenced. I've heard them. I've heard them in the atmosphere, and so I'm saying it, but y'all don't come for me like, girl, you just compared football with soccer. You know what? Or baseball with hockey. Just be happy that your girl knows the names, okay? So with that being said, let me bring it to Lana. You heard a lot. What are some reflections or reactions you have to what Sister Nakae just broke down? And I'll come back to if I may, Sister Lana, in a bit. You know, the piece around, because it was so rich the first half. The second half is the mitigation strategies. I'm very, very fascinated by those examples and unpacking that. But I kind of want to just unpack the richness of that first half, Sister Lana.
I want to congratulate Dr. Nakae on her work and the work of the students and the contributors, because moving the needle in any geography, any discipline, especially in medicine, is difficult. And that's because we have to kind of always just do a quick little history lesson. Remember that it is medicine. It is the forefathers of Western medicine who codified by making claims that were taken as scientific, which were not. They were ideological, that there are actual distinct races. It is the fathers of medicine who decided that the shapes of faces and nose and textures of hair were denoting an actual scientific biological distinction, which we know is completely erroneous and based on ideologies of white supremacy. So medicine often gets to hide behind law and state laws and histories and politics, and kind of, like all good white supremacist magic tricks, disappear from the conversation while doing a lot of violence. And so it's important to remember that it is medicine, not actually the law, that created the codification and biologization of race in the human body in actual practice. It is the physicians that were both fathers of the U.S. Constitution and physicians in the areas of what was emerging as biological and medical sciences who codified it. So the kind of work that you're doing in the U.S. at the AGME is striking at the heart of a very old and violent structure that had the capacity and still has the capacity to deliver many good things. So I wanted to say thanks for that. And from like my perspective, I'm across in this quote border and in Canada, and there's a bunch of work that myself and a colleague and I do with the equivalent, which is like the Royal College and trainings and whatnot. And I think what's important to remember is that each geography has a distinct set of challenges to work through and around. And so one of the things that, when I'm thinking with what you shared, Dr. Nakae, is how the U.S.'s particular political structure also informs what can be flexed in the halls of medicine and change. So this language of bias, right, comes largely because the business sector does not want anybody using language that triggers thoughts of litigation. And so that has seeped across our border, because bias is actually a stepping stone to discrimination. And bias, in the concept and the way that we're talking about, is in relationship to power. So bias is one of the key ingredients necessary to perform discrimination. And discrimination actually has a number of tests depending on which court of law and what kind of litigation you're seeking to seek, some remedy before the law. And I want to also clarify that I am no great fan of white settler laws, but that is what we have to work with in the current structures of of the settler state. And so discrimination is actually what we're talking about. So I want to clarify that when the term bias is used, it's because we are managing a political situation and we are managing the realities of what bias leads to. And so bias is only fails to be discrimination based on the position of power that you have over the environment or the individuals. So when we're talking about people who are making decisions about admissions, about staying in or being out, getting to the next phase, we're actually talking about the performance of discrimination. Bias is left for those who have less power and less ability to inform or define what happens to the object of that treatment. And so it's important for us to always kind of circle back to what words mean. And so I was reading your paper and seeing that, what were the associations that people came up with. So bias does serve to do an important piece of work in the terms that is being used in the article and the way that you're doing your work. And that is to flag to people, something going on here that's not right. But part of the reason there's this piece around justice in the work that I do is because, justice and the law are not always aligned, right? So that's why I don't speak specifically to the law. But in the Canadian context, I'm very clear about calling discrimination and referring to bias as the process by which you achieve discrimination, because that is the space, discrimination, where the legal system can intervene if the case warrants the right components in order to be brought and certified for trial. And so when people understand that you're on a path to crossing a legal line, I think that's also really helpful, because part of what bias has been used for in the tech space, and we know this because of, tell-all journalistic investigative articles who have actually articulated this, and it was articulated even prior to the AI space in other spaces, that it is big business that tries to manufacture the law. So that's why in artificial intelligence spaces, you hear about, bias, and you hear about attempts at fairness, and you hear about everything but regulation. You hear about everything but the law, because they spent hundreds, I think one article argues billions of dollars to ensure that words like regulation, discrimination never came into the artificial intelligence space. And then in so doing, they had to find other words. And that's where you get bias, implicit bias. These things that were sitting in articles Dusty not paid attention to got a new life for a reason. And so I really appreciate your work, but I also want to take the moment to step outside of that ring that you have so valiantly stepped into and remind us that bias is a necessary and central step to achieving discrimination, which is a non-legal practice, right? And so bias is always the most central step in achieving discrimination. And discrimination is the act of producing that judgment such that it produces an impact that is unfavorable and unjust in the other person's life. You see how close bias and discrimination are, and why we have to spend so much time with this word of bias. So I personally appreciate the work. It does take me under the collar, because computational code means things, and language is a form of computational code. And when we think about some of our great critical Black writers who talk about the calculus of white terrorism and the calculus that reduces Black people, part of the calculus is that words switch. So we have to use the words that are necessary to make sure that we can have the conversation. But I think there's also an opportunity, now that you've done this great work, to continue to bring it closer to the fact that this is a path to discrimination, and that we are only on this line of it because someone hasn't sought their right to litigation. Because these prejudgments, when they're talking about an admissions committee, when we're talking about our workplace or our potential workplace, for a profession that is in dire need of a diverse, when I say diverse, I mean literal skill sets of people. The last report I have here on my desk for the US is you're down 90,000 plus doctors, and that's a couple years old. So this type of bias is performing a kind of discrimination that we can see clearly as evidenced by the absence of an equally brilliant population of physicians who come from a plethora of backgrounds. And since we're talking about Black people, I'm going to talk specifically about Black people. And we know that the situation of power defines whether bias is discrimination, right? So like was said, we're talking about, oh, I like one team over the other, or I tend to like brown eyes over blue eyes. That's all fine if you just, at the car wash and you're having a conversation with somebody.
Not the car wash.
Right? And you're just talking while you wait in line. That's one thing. But when it comes to one deciding who will be one's potential physician, who will eventually become the chief of staff, who might become the chief medical officer, when we're talking about that, we're actually talking about what are the processes of discrimination that are ongoing. And bias is the path to discrimination. And so for me, I just want to keep us central and focused on discrimination, and that bias is an important step. But in my universe of technology and medicine and understanding how it's being used as a backdoor to undermine and your self-determination and our civil liberties, what we are dealing with is a very expensive word game that's been manufactured by billionaires so that we do not even see the tools in front of us, so that we are reduced to only trying to do everything by committee. And again, litigation is expensive. It ain't easy, and it ain't desirable in all cases, and it's not always going to get you what you want. But what we do know is that without a stick, all they're going to do is eat the carrots. So I'm gonna leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, you have to leave it there, baby, because without a stick, all they're gonna do is eat the carrot. All you're gonna get is a salad. I really did call it that. A salad, right? That's all you're gonna get: a carrot salad with some ranch dressing and lettuce, baby. You're just gonna get a healthier oppressive system, just a leaner, meaner one. Yes, it's all about the accountability.
I want to jump back in because I like Dr. Nakae's mitigation strategies. I like them. I like them very much because that's the indication that the stick is there, because those are actually clearly documented items that can be used in pursuing discrimination. So she's actually highlighting, like, here's all the things that we can do to mitigate our asses getting dragged into the court. And when you have these things in place, and they are also evaluated externally by an independent third party, every 2 years or whatever, to make sure no one games the system, then there's an incentive. And that incentive is because we know that in terms of capital, the university, the societies, the licensure boards have been renegade white supremacist terrorism sites because there has been no way to levy a cost. And we know that the only time white supremacist state instruments, whether they're public or private, have responded is when there is a cost.
Right.
And so that is what I do like, where I think that there is this nice line that is walked. But that's where I would say, bring on our legal clinic students and let's get ready for the stick. Because if they don't want to take the mitigation strategies, if they don't want to take the medicine, then, well, we might have to put you in the emergency room.
She said, if you don't want to mitigate, we might have to litigate. Okay? You don't want to mitigate, then baby, we might have to litigate. And I love it. I love that. And that's a great segue to Dr. Nakae. I really want to get more into those mitigation strategies, right? And you gave some examples. I love this idea of, for the name bias. Well, they have a pronunciation director. Oh, before I go into that, I want to lift up something that you did teach me. Thank you. And so Dr. Nakae told me about, I mentioned the Atlanta Braves, and she said, the Braves are controversial because they refuse to give up their Native American mascots. So, there is some controversy around there. I knew there's a reason that particular team was in my mind, because again, I'm not a sports person, you already know. And yes, because I've been following that, and that came to mind. But I want to lift that up and name that. And so if there was any offense perpetuated by my unthinkingness there, I sincerely apologize. So with that being said, coming back to those mitigation strategies. And so having a director of pronunciation, I really love that idea, and like that person's job to like learn all the names and how to pronounce it correctly. Then also this idea of, well, then everybody gets an initial, like we're just gonna have to, do it that way. As an example, I want to talk about more mitigation strategies that you have generated and just kind of name those. I also want to inject a thought, if you might sort of react to regarding the initializing option. And I just wonder about that because there is a thing about the beauty of our names, right? Those of us that don't have, global majority names. Okay. And that those names mean something. My name Ijeoma means safe journey, good journey. And having that be there to represent part of me and my fullness, in my mind, it feels diluted by an initial, even though understanding the purpose of it. And it may mean nothing. It may at the end of the day not be a big deal either way. But it did come up, in my mind about if a program chose to use initials and sort of what is that loss. I know for me, I'm in medical education leadership as APD, Associate Program Director for the Internal Medicine Department at Wayne State University. And it's one of the largest, internal medicine programs. I'm also on faculty leadership in the MedPeds program, which is my actual specialty, internal medicine and pediatrics combined residency program. And I know when I see African names and Nigerian names, African names, I'm so, there's a light that goes up, in me when I see names that are typically that are typical, more typical in the diaspora communities. There's a light that goes up in me, and I love that. It makes me happy. I genuinely feel happy. And so I wonder, is that lost by that approach? And so, in other words, introducing, even as we think through the mitigation strategies, are there unintended consequences that need to be thought about? Because again, part of it is still right through the lens of white supremacism, because what you're really thinking about, the truth of the matter, who you're worried about are white-bodied people, and even, people in black and brown bodies by that cultivate a white supremacist mindset. Like, it's still whiteness that is being centered in what are the mitigation strategies, like who are we protecting people from, right? And in so speaking, we're not really thinking about, well, then what are we taking away from the committee members or the group members or the leadership members who are not white or who don't embody whiteness, right? And the joy they get when they see members of their communities represented or coming down the pipe. So I wanted to live that thought because that was one of the things I was sort of massaging. Let's just discuss that, and then we'll talk about other mitigation strategies. Go ahead, sis.
I love that. I just want to say that Sister Lana was blowing my mind with this notion that bias is a softer, safer kind of way to talk about discrimination. And one of our biases that we want to help people be aware of is coded language, right? When people say, well, this is a diverse candidate, or this person's, maybe doesn't have enough fire in the belly, where people are trying to say something that is discriminatory, but they're using coded language. And I started thinking about, when did we begin having these unconscious bias conversations? Let me tell you that people of color did not start these conversations around unconscious bias. Okay, it was started by Cook Ross, which was a largely white, male, heterosexual. And so my mind is like blown right now in terms of just thinking about how the concept of bias itself is coded in a way that centers whiteness and makes it safer. When we talk about discrimination, that engenders associations with people of color, right? But when we talk about unconscious bias, that is lighter and fluffier and a more cotton candy way of kind of talking about discrimination. So I am appreciating very much just the notion of, how did these conversations start and who started them? And are they safer and lighter and more palatable ways to really talk about racism, right? Racism, which, you say that and everybody goes, ooh, you're not allowed to say that in these parts, right? So we have the coded language piece regarding initials and some of the strategies. absolutely our institutions are steeped and soaked and based in white supremacism and those norms. And so it is, I love that you brought up that, are we centering white comfort by using strategies that potentially don't ask people to say it? Because I don't even really think that name practice is essentially about familiarity, because y'all in medicine pronounce all these crazy Latin shit. Ain't nobody have problem. My colleague, Dr. Wendy Elamine, says you can say duodenum, blah, 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 all these crazy terms, and nobody goes, well, that's too complicated for me to say. People learn it and say it because it is proximal to power and it makes them sound smart. We had a governor in Illinois whose last name was Blagojevich. Do you think it was spelled like that? No, it was not. But people pronounced it correctly. There's a famous NCAA coach that everybody calls Coach K. His name is Mike Krzyzewski, but his actual name is spelled with KZ because it's Polish. Everybody says his name correctly. All sportscasters, all people who talk like, so I actually think that this is more about power and respect than it really is about what we think is normal. And it's again, it's that centering of whose comfort and is being centered in this instance. So I will definitely consider thinking about whether, as you're saying, you have a positive reaction towards Nigerian names or diasporic names. But then on the other side, there are other committee members who are probably more plentiful in number than you, who are not having that same reaction, right? So then how do we kind of think about what strategies can mitigate this so that folks' credentials and what they really bring to the table can come forward? The example that you gave about credit score is a perfect example of the reflexive nature of systemic and individual bias. First of all, credit scores are bullshit. Okay. Credit scores actually in lending risk decisions do not bear out as reducing risk, but we don't have anything else. And they serve the status quo because the people who set up the rules around credit bureaus don't look like me and Dr. Opara, right? So just because you've never, I mean, think about how much of a fallacy it is to say, just because you've never borrowed money and demonstrated that you can pay it back means that you are actually not worthy of doing that. Everybody has to do that for the first time, right? So I don't actually think that the credit scores, the data doesn't bear out. Like people with higher incomes have more bankruptcies, for example, than people with lower incomes. So that's not even a reliable thing, but it's baked into so many of our financial systems, right? And how things are underwritten and who's worthy. We're giving worthiness and value in this capitalistic system. And then to bring structural bias from one element of society into admissions and say, we found a connection between these two things. Maybe the connection is poverty. Maybe the connection is social capital. Like you're probably not measuring or associating any of things that are actually meaningful in terms of outcomes of who can be a successful physician or candidate for a program, but then they get baked in. So we have things like admission scores. And people say, well, the people that we choose have high scores. So high scores are associated with success. You didn't choose people across the entire score spectrum. You literally statistically violated an assumption of the sample and cut your curve in half and then extrapolated performance across an entire performance curve based on just half of the people, right? So MCAT validity is only as good as, well, we've only chosen people who we think are in this top part of the bracket. And we have more data that demonstrates that scores across a much broader spectrum, people can be successful, right? So these things get baked into our psyche, these biases. I was at the Nickens lecture. Dr. Leveist actually gave a phenomenal Nickens lecture at the Association of American Medical Colleges meeting. And he actually, I want to champion this and lift this up because he asked us to. He actually looked at the statistic, there are more Black men in prison than in college. He looked at that and he said, why do we accept that as truth? How many of you think that's true? A bunch of people raised their hand. So then he actually said, I looked this up. I looked up college enrollment and he said only 4-year colleges and universities, not counting community colleges and other forms of higher education, not counting graduate school, just 4-year first-time enrollees and what the population was according to the public data available for the prison system. That has never been true. It has never been true. But how many of us have accepted that and what assumptions underlie our beliefs about the world that we wouldn't question that more readily, right? And I felt checked. I was like, you came for me on that one because I definitely fell into that. But if we had said there are more women in prison than in college, people would be like, no, that's not true, right? Like, so why did we even allow that to not be questioned for so many years? I'm going to lift that up for Dr. Levice and say that is not true. Stop saying that. The data, right, Sister Lana, the data does not bear that out. And so we need to make sure that we don't fall prey to that. But it is our bias and regular discriminatory practices that allow those kinds of beliefs to flourish and to take root, and then to become part of the structural thinking of how we do things. So
and Sister Sunny, can you mute? I have to come in here. No, I think that's powerful. I want to rest. I want to drop the mic for a second there. Yo, if nothing else, from Amart and from hopefully everyone here is participating in their own self-directed learning, transformational healing process of decolonization and anti-racist, anti-oppressive, just like deconditioning, unlearning, and relearning, and all of those things. This is hopefully a crux of this work, which is to constantly be in a state of unlearning, to be constantly question the things that we take for granted. What are the assumptions that are made in any space that we find ourselves in, right? What are the facts we take just as, yes, that's how it is, in the work that Lana and I doing as it relates to race correction. I mean, there was a sociologist, I think she's a sociologist, Lundy Brown, and she wrote a book, breeding race into the machine, that talks about the racist roots of the spirometer that is used to measure lung function, and that is race corrected. It's correct, quote unquote, corrected for race. When Black folks step into the room, there's a correction to account for the presumed lower lung capacity of Black peoples, okay, based on a statement, y'all, not a study, not a nothing. At least the EGFR, the kidney function race correction nonsense, was based on some kind of pseudoscience, at least, that was performed. Somebody made an effort, to do the wrong thing, but an effort was made. But this is the laziest one of them all. It was just a statement that your president, Thomas Jefferson, I think he was the third president, I don't remember, made, in terms of his belief of how enslaved Africans' lungs work. That was carried on by Dr. Samuel Cartwright, your boy that created the diagnosis, drapetomania and diaesthesia, Ethiopica, and all that jazz, and was perpetuated into the 2020 to the two, baby, where right now you having breathing issues, your doctor say, okay, baby, we need a pulmonary function test. Go to the pulmonologist or the respirologist if you're not in the US, and go get your lungs tested. And they take one look at you, your Black ass. They will recalibrate that machine because you are presumed to have a lower functioning lungs. So when you talk about what we assume and we take for granted as facts, we have to constantly be checking the foundations of the things we accept to be true, always. Okay. And that is a very powerful point. And I just really wanted to super emphasize that, because that really forms the crux of much of the conversation we make, because that's the biases, right? Because these are things that we take to be true. And yes, to what Sister Lana said, this is something I've been saying for a long time, but she's always so much more eloquent in the rendition of the difference. But I was like, your bias doesn't kill me, but the power you have to translate those biases to action. And what we call the action is discrimination, right? Right? I didn't label it discrimination. I just knew. I said, this bias, for what that's something that lives in your head. And I don't give a shit as long as it lives in your head. But the minute you can translate it to a decision, to an action, to a behavior, to a word that's going to cause me harm, then, baby, we have a problem. There is a problem. And so And she beautifully described that what we talk about is discrimination. You are acting differentially upon a particular person based on the bias that you have that has been produced by overexposure to, again, oppressive and unjust systems. So I am grateful for that piece, but that also, like, unpacking and revealing that texture around the assumptions that you make and the things that we accept to be true. When you read a paper and people talk about, yeah, black people, and yeah, this and black people have a different thing, and outcome, they have different vitamin D, or black people did worse, because usually black people are doing worse, and some other thing, they don't define who they're calling black. They don't talk about the contextualization of, well, what is the context? What particular group of people who identify as black are you naming? What are the other factors that are dynamically interacting with this identity that might be causing that outcome? We don't hold them to accountability to explain themselves and contextualize. We don't hold them to accountability to talk about the role of structural racism and white supremacism. We don't hold them to accountability to define what they mean by black, or what they mean by ancestry, or how they're conflating ancestry with race, with ethnicity, with nationality. And you are an editor, you are a reviewer, you are a publisher, you are a grant funder, you are, the promotion and tenure track. You are a co-author. This is what we're talking about, the structurality of so-called bias that truly shows up as discrimination. And the piece, what is powerful about that, because language matters and it's powerful, is that it's litigable. It's litigable. Because if we don't have that stick, then baby, you just helping people make salad, okay? Chef salad, like Sister Lana said. Well, listen, Sister Sani, I'm gonna have you continue, but before I do, this is a good time to announce, if you have questions, thoughts, comments, please, this is a time to request. Now you can request to speak, to come on the round table and talk your talk as we continue the rest of the conversation. But please, thank you for giving me that space, Sister Sani, to really emphasize that very critical point as we go forward. All right, sis, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And such an important point, and just really appreciate. I love this work in our communities because there's just so much rich learning, right? Just all directions of learning and application. The mitigation strategies are here because I don't think it's helpful to tell people that they have bias without telling people what they can do about it and holding them accountable to do those things. So as Lana said, deconstructing how this coded language works in our committees, right? So mitigation strategies for coded language are to ask, what did you mean by that? Or to ban certain words from discussion, such as the F word, which is fit, right? How many times are people allowed to say, well, there's just not a good fit? What do you mean by that? Do you mean that their research is not aligned with what the center is funding? Do you mean that they're not prepared? Do you mean that they don't look like you, that you wouldn't want to go get a beer with them after work? I mean, there's so many things that just fall underneath there. Or the one that people say, well, I just don't think they're aligned with our mission. Okay, well, say more. Please explain specifically what you mean. So asking people to explain when you hear that kind of coded language is really helpful. One of them that I learned about from this I just read Inclusion on Purpose. It's a really great book by Ruchika Tulsian. And it uses a lens of centering women of color and inclusion work with the notion that if we get it right for women of color, we actually get it right for everybody within the entire system. And so one of her strategies, she calls it flip it to test it. And I do describe it in mine as well, of let's apply the same standard to another group and see if it holds, right? So in our admissions committee, we had someone say, well, this person's a native Spanish speaker and they majored in Spanish in college. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, I don't think that that's academically rigorous at all. And a white woman raised her hand on our committee and said, I'm a native English speaker and I majored in English in college. Is my degree like fluff and wasn't rigorous at all? And then everybody went, ooh, right? And it was like, No, that was a huge bias that you were ascribing. Or people will say, well, this person is XYZ race, ethnicity, group identified, but they don't speak the language. Okay, but are we holding everyone accountable for speaking an additional language in this space? Is that part of our standards that we've created? Where in our rubric are we evaluating that? If not, then we cannot say this person isn't Korean enough, or Black enough, whatever stereotypes are coming out. So we can use that to sort of think beyond it. A big one is time crunch, which I think we face in our institutions, no matter what they are doing, is we just never have enough time. And so being able to use concrete tools prior to getting to the discussion to determine how much agreement is there or disagreement is there. And then for groups that we've historically excluded, we need to spend some time looking at their materials prior to make sure that bias is not showing up. In other words, we need to expect it and we need to correct it, rather than going along and saying like, no, we don't have any bias in art. Like, we need to be actively looking for bias and correcting it within our systems. We get pretty invested in numbers, but people should always be telling numbers what to do. Numbers should never be telling people what to do, because there are times when the people who create the numbers really get it wrong. So one of the things that we can do with time crunch is to put the most difficult discussions at the beginning of the meeting, because we know that our brains get tired. How many of us have sat in a meeting and have been like, if we had just had another half an hour to discuss this candidate, it would have gone differently. But people just got tired and the time ran out and they just said, you know what, let's all just vote. And then everybody sort of reflexively reverts to their comfort zone instead of taking the time to really think through it. So we can postpone decisions where we don't feel that we've had enough discussion, or where that time crunch is coming into play as a factor didn't affect the decisions we made on other people's committees. So even just giving the committee permission to say, we'll bump this to the next time we meet. Who controls the timeline? We do. So we can say, look, we have not given this ample discussion, or we need more information. Maybe there's a question that's coming up, something called information bias, where when there's a gap, we have an unfavorable bias, we think the worst. Oh, this is a first-gen student. They took a year off of school. They didn't say what they were doing. I don't like this candidate because I don't know what they were doing for the year before they came here. Why is that a reason to discount someone? If we need to know that, we should ask, and we should tell applicants that it matters. But we could also not vote, follow up with the student and say, hey, we want to know what you're doing. Send us a paragraph about what you're doing, and give that candidate an opportunity to respond, right? Because all of those hidden rules also come into play, where we are holding people accountable for rules and regulations that we never communicated to them, right? And so just the bias that's baked into how we do things, we have to step back and deconstruct it. Say, yes, we can postpone decisions. The order of the agenda matters, right? How we are using these tools. Are we examining them for bias? And as we even discuss candidates, making regular disclosure of our bias a part of how we do it, right? How many of you go to a committee and everybody has to fill out conflict of interest? Every lecture that we give, we have to have a conflict of interest statement. Like, we've integrated that into our practices because we want to enact being ethical, right? Do I have a pharmaceutical relationship? Am I invested in this company? What kinds of other things am I doing? But we have to actually make bias mitigation practice integrated into what we do in that same way. So we discuss the candidates. We say, here's their strengths, here's their limitations, here's the biases that I've seen come up, or here are possible biases that I've noticed in the materials that have come through so far, and just normalize it and make it part of how we are empowering ourselves to use the better parts of our brain to kind of cover more ground and identify where we might be going wrong.
I love that. Thank you so much. Like, that is absolutely on point. And let me get these speakers up. La, 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 la. Let's see who's okay. Okay, and just raise your hand if if you want to speak, and I'll call on you in an order which I will announce in a second. But oh yeah, yes, Sister Sonia, for really breaking it down that way. This idea of explicitness. Okay, right? Like, the simplest thing is, yo, as part of our practice and our culture, we have this whole bias mitigation approach. We have to accept that we are all here, we all have biases, right, okay, okay. Basically, community agreement. What is your organizations, institutions, committee, groups, community agreement when it comes to bias, discrimination, anti-racism? Okay, like really being explicit and just name it, not just having this silent like rainbow elephant in the corner, okay, and that everyone just kind of knows and then dances around, which is such a culture of whiteness. I can't, this idea of just like things are there and nobody says anything. Well, like you got to squash that. And what that reminds me of is white supremacy culture norms that Tema Okun and team developed. Those, I think, 11 or so, 11 or 13 traits of white supremacy culture. And Dr. Nakae, you and Dr. Bunny Mason, who's in the space now, wrote about that, and dominant cultural norms as well. And I want to flip this over to Sister Lana, and then we'll get the speakers on stage. But Sister Lana, what white supremacy culture norms exist in our institutions that make it difficult to result in these mitigation strategies? And one of this piece, like I said, is this silencing, right? This like tiptoeing silencing. And like what Dr. Nakae is saying is make it explicit, shout it out, establish that we do this, right? And now this is our rubric, and this is the ways in which everybody has permission to call each other out and ask questions. Like she said, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? Or we will not, these are the words that we have decided are so like baggaged that it's not even worth, like we will waste time unpacking that. Let's not use them. Just say what you mean. I say this all the time. It's what drives me crazy, right? It's like I can't, like with coded language, I don't know. I just something. I say what you mean. I don't speak code. I don't. You gotta say what you mean. And that's why language is so important. It's such a matter of justice, because these nebulous, vague words that and usually, and that's why people like me can be very annoying on these committees. But you also need people like me on these committees because of people's lives that are often, at stake. Sister Lana talked about the physician shortage, and it reminded me of the wonderful goddess Auntie Dr. Kamara Phyllis Jones in her definition of racism. It's a system that assigns value and apportions opportunity based on phenotype, that systematically and systemically advantages a group of people while systematically and systemically disadvantaging other people. And this is the key part, right? That wastes human resources and saps the strength of society through the waste of human resources. These systems, these biased and discriminatory practices result in the waste of human resources and saps the society. In a society where we have incredible physician shortage, when we are refusing to integrate bias mitigation strategies by at least starting with just being explicit, we do discriminate, okay, through the process of bias and establishing that. And now these are the mitigation strategies we're going to put in place. We are contributing to that physician shortage, because keep in mind, these so-called criterias and so-called worthiness and all of those things, the things that the stupid affirmative action case right now in Supreme Court is stupidly like stupidifying, okay, that those criteria were are constructs of white supremacism to exclude. And when we know that that's the function, and who suffers? Society. The AAMC, which is the American, I always mix up these A's, but American Academy and Association, they're one of those three of medical colleges, predicts that by 2034, there will be an estimated physician shortage between 38,000 and 124,000 physicians in both primary and specialty care. We have incredible physician shortages and amazing, beautiful, lovely just awesome people come by our tape desk all the time that are excluded because of criteria that don't make no sense, that was founded on white supremacist ideals of who a physician is, and really has little translation to being an amazing, effective, powerful, impactful physician. And we can say this for in nursing, we can say this in pharmacy, we can say this in speech therapy, in occupational therapy, in veterinary medicine. We're going to have an AMARC on with vets, baby, because we don't talk about them. Okay. We can say this in sociology, in humanities, like in every field. And so we have to start asking different questions. Sister Lana, before I get on, I continue on this soapbox and it becomes a body wash box. It's just like a whole too much. Yeah. Please go ahead and jump, because I really want to talk about what are those cultural norms, those invisible, often invisible, but very evident cultural norms baked inside of white supremacism that makes it difficult to activate these mitigation strategies. And then we will go to the following people. We will start with Dr. Guiton, Dr. Day, and Michelle. But everybody else, please come on up. Now is your time. Go ahead, Sister Lana.
To your question, what are those norms? And I would say, based on my experience and also based on a large body of literature, that it is us not knowing and being encouraged not to know how systems of power and decision-making work. Let me repeat that. The most important norm of white settler cultures is that we accept that we don't really know how things work, or we accept that we think we know how things work. But when asked, how does something work? Often we don't know how, and we don't take the time, don't have the time, or don't have the skills to identify what the architecture and flow of a system is and how it produces what it produces. And I would say that's centrally important, because part of why I think Dr. Nakae has had these successes is, there's a certain amount of that system that you have understood and that you are striking at the heart of to provide a different kind and set of opportunities. And so in terms of norms, the invisibility properties, the invisibility cloaking of white supremacy, to walk around on its hind hooves in broad daylight, seeking whom it shall devour, while everyone acts like they don't know how it happened, how we ended up with this system, how we end up not selecting enough people who actually have what we need to fulfill these positions as physicians, whether we're talking in Canada or the US. Has a lot to do with how white supremacy continues to function, which is by being ever present and violent and yet simultaneously invisible. And that's possible because I'll tell you, here in Canada and Ontario specifically, they removed civics from high school. So meaning
the erasure.
I can ask any 20-something, can you explain to me how our democratic process works in relation to any sphere of your life, like your region, like municipal government, your provincial or federal, just wherever you're at, and you will get a blank stare. And that is because they don't want us to know who are they, people who have the ability to manage that kind of power. And so many of us are institutions. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, whether they're in computational science, administrators of universities, business people, politicians, who have come for advice or consultation with me and asked about. And I'm just absolutely befuddled that they don't even know the architecture of their own department, faculty, university, donor. They don't actually know the beast of the belly that they inhabit. Right? And so it's very difficult to do the kind of mitigation work that's necessary if you don't understand how the structure works. Because, for instance, I love what Dr. Nakae has offered as a mitigation strategy. Where I would go next is, in order to avoid that norm, the norm of not having a grasp of the architecture, how and what impinges on it, who controls it, both officially and unofficially. And remember, the majority of the hidden curriculum, as we call it in medicine, which are the things that are not officially in your curriculum for medical training, but that you learn from your preceptors. That's when you're on the floor, where they're giving you examples in your foundations medical class. what they're doing is they're imputing the cultural norm. And that cultural norm is usually loaded with a whole lot of stuff, and some of it is downright discriminatory. But again, you're not getting a test on it officially. You may be assessed on it by how they perceive you do your OSCE. Like, there's all of these subtle ways in which people can decide whether you've assimilated and adopted particular kinds of hidden curriculum. So while it's not official as part of your testing rubric, it's official. And so it's important to be able to know how those things come to be and what are the structures you're inside of. So I think one of the most important things to make mitigation strategies like the ones Dr. Nakae is talking about is to look at the architecture of that system. So we can see across, the US and Canada that we've had a very, unpleasant experience that for those folks who didn't think that the knife cuts both ways, we've been shown that it has. We've been shown very clearly that it has. And what I'm referring to here is that strange thing called representation that we struggle with has come to cut us both ways. And so, for instance, I'll give an example. Here in Canada, we have Black folks, and I learned this thing from an African American, so I want to give you all the credit for it. All skin folk ain't kin folk, right? So we have seen here in Ontario and in Canada a number of Black people who are so Clarence Thomas, like they don't even mess with Black people but to give them valet keys. They ain't even trying. But during the moment of George Floyd, and for us, Krasinski Paquette and DeFonte Miller, and a host of other Black people who have been cut down or maimed as a result of white supremacy, they started looking for any Negro they could find. And preferably, the kind of Negro that will do the bidding of white liberals and white conservatives. The various versions of the Clarence Thomases that we have in the universe. And to install them. And to install them on speaker circuits so that they can hear those Black voices speak back to them at TD Bank, get honorary degrees, because they realize, okay, so we can't beat them, but we sure as can have our own appear to join them. And so what we have increasingly is a number of Black men and women, as well as other racialized groups, I'll add. We've seen it with the South Asian community. We've seen it because the Muslim community is, it's religion, not an ethnicity. We've seen all kinds of strange examples of people where we're like, people are like, the people like, we don't even know this dude. Where they found this person to come to claim to represent Blackness or any other ethnicity has become problematic. So my question would be, how might we think about how that norm of making sure that none of us ideally understand how whatever system that we're working in actually functions. Because when we confront that is what is the norm and that is what is desired, oftentimes, whether it's been in computational sciences or in addressing something organizationally in terms of how we might address a piece of technology or radiology or whatever, I have to remind, especially my good physicians, because my work is in AI and medicine in particular, and clinical practice and diagnostics specifically, they're like, oh, and we'll do this. And I said, I'm just sorry, no disrespect, but can I ask you to stop? You won't do any such thing. You, my friend, are a physician. You do not own the top 1% of companies who actually own the supply chain for this and the market share and are on the ticker tape I read this morning. So whatever you desire, I think it's wonderful. But unless you actually want to figure out how business works, stop offering things you can't produce. This technology is going to go rogue. And despite the fact that we've all sat here in this lab, wanting the best for cancer patients, thinking of the best solutions, trying to make sure our data sets are accurate, that unless we commit equally to the systems that decide what happens after, none of the good things that we have sought will actually come to fruition. So my thing would be, how do we think through and support work like the work that Dr. Nakae has done in terms of institutionalizing it and stabilizing it to deal with the double bind? Because we can see over and over again in various offices, from the academy to administration to politics to corporations, where there have been good people with the right kinds of knowledges and transdisciplinary relationships and ethics develop systems or attempt. Like, look at Twitter. I mean, that was a private venture that was in a whole lot of spaces trying to manage a whole lot of crazy going on in the backseats, right? And what happens? What happens when the Elon Musk of the AGME shows up of, AI and computer science? How has the institution or the work been edified through various mechanisms, and how have those, if you will, checks and balances been put in place so that an alarm is set off each time an important benchmark is crossed that will bring it down, right? Because not everybody can respond to everything at the same time. But if after all of this work that's been done to bring about these interventions and for them to mature, Dr. Nakae moves on to a different office or a different area, how do we ensure that we don't end up, right, with like the United States did with Supreme Court judges who said one thing on Monday and another thing when they got their seat, and then turn around and do the equivalent of giving you anti-abortion legislation, but the equivalent in the AGME, or as the case is for me here in a number of spaces, both legislatively and clinically in artificial intelligence, computational sciences, and diagnostics. So how do we edify our institutions? How do we put in those breakers so that if they start to come for wall number one, people are aware. Number two, and people know, okay, there are 4 lines of defense to protect this. So we know when we're at, station critical. So we know the difference between when we need to mobilize half the country versus, half of the committee. And I think that is the part. How do we overcome the norm that white supremacy is structural? It has an architecture, it has a flow, it has finance, it has actors, it never sleeps. And so we know this. We've known it for 500 years. So how do we take that knowledge and then say, okay, we've got this program. It's, it's going to continue to mature. How do we help support putting in systems and checks and balances for mitigation strategies so we don't end up with, and I'm using Clarence Thomas, sorry, you're the whipping boy today, no pun intended, because, he stands large, right? Like, he's standing there advocating for something. And trust me, if they think he won't be able to stay where he is, I think the right wing has another thing coming for him. And have people like that then installed. Because we've seen that. Part of the calls I get is, oh my God, we did all this work to try to encourage STEM and da-da-da. And now what? Your program just happens to be selecting for the most acid, self-hating Black folks, Asian folks you can find. You weren't prepared for that? Well, no, we were trying to ensure that we had diversity. And I'm like, that's the problem. Because diversity is not the thing that we're looking for. We're looking for anti-colonization and justice. And those were not your questions when you interviewed. That was not the resume or the demonstrated track record that the people had to have. What you wanted was some melanin. You wanted some aesthetic. And so anybody can shop for that.
That is,
but you never made requirements for what must be the character, ethics, and demonstratable track record, which is much more difficult to manufacture.
And I think that's the opportunity that we have in this work. I thank you. As always, elevating the conversation now, right? And that's where we get into that. It's going to be another conversation, baby. What is representation, right? What is representation? Is it diversity where you just have you have the melanin to make the picture beautiful, or is it the politics? Right. And where is the overlap and where is the difference? And so that is just like next level, Sister Lana, right there, that is next level. So when we are coming up with our questions, our admissions criteria and our promotions criteria and our hiring criteria and all that business, are we selecting just for, brown bodies to occupy the space? Or what is the politics? What is the character? What is inside of those bodies? Because oftentimes white supremacism can be embodied in Black bodies and in brown bodies. And so that is a very key point there. And that's just like next level of then what our criteria or our processes and decision making needs to look like. And so I just love that. I want us to sit with that because I think that's its own like roundtable right there. And bring in the folks because Dr. Nakai does have to go in a few, so I want to have her to at least be able to respond to some comments before she's able to do that. The order of speakers is Dr. Pascal, Dr. Day, we have Java Dawkins, and Michelle. So Dr. Guiton, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Sisters, you guys have me fired up this morning, like for real. I mean, I'm serious, man. This is like my fight in academia where you have all these gatekeepers, all these like vague languages. And if you don't know, you don't know, and you think they have your best interest at heart. Like you sit on those hiring committees and these people talk about, oh, but how do we know it's a good fit? This one wants a boat, but do we even have the money? Whereas they're ready to give this big piece of equipment for another white male who was at Yale or some shit like that. I'm like, no more, okay? Say the things that you want to say, how you want to say them so that I can understand, you know? And, you know, the other thing that annoys me in academia the most is this thing. Committee, we need data, so we're gonna have the committee, the
death by
subcommittee of
committee.
the subcommittee of the subcommittee. I'm like, yo, people have studied this for years. The data is there, the practices, the practical approach to implement it. They broke everything down for you. You are choosing not to do it. You, like for instance, a clear example of this nonsense. When I was at CSU East Bay, these people are talking about how do we make the environment better for how do we improve the experience of our Black students, and they have to have a committee of a committee. Meanwhile, they give a PhD, okay? They give a PhD to someone to study this, and her thesis is in their library. I mean, how stupid do you think we are? And there's this lack of urgency, you know, when they're sitting there talking about, oh, our unconscious bias, oh, we need to do this training, we need to do this training. You have people who are starving. You have students who are homeless. You have students who cannot come to class because they don't have access to the internet at home. I mean, to me, the lack of urgency pisses me off so much. Like, they sit there in their AC's office and looking at us down here like, you know, like, what are these people talking about? We need more data. We need more data. And I find it so frustrating. I mean, you can chew gum and walk at the same time. While you are studying or learning how to get over your biases, at least take the time to implement the ideas, the inclusive ideas that people are offering you. We're not going to sit here and wait for when you are ready for my life to continue. I mean, who the hell do you think you are? And then they have this thing where they use tenure, at least in academia, right? They use tenure to shut you up. They're like, oh, you're junior faculty, you should keep your head down until you have tenure. Fuck that shit, okay? I mean, excuse my French. But
that's okay. We're multilingual.
No, I am not going to sit there and accept your abuse and accept you treating my people like crap just because of tenure. No. Because here's the thing. You get tenure and it's more free work they put on you.
Yes.
It's more free work they put
free
on
labor.
you. No way. And Dr. Nakae talk about this idea of centering white people in this fight. Yes, people, it's not about you. Okay? When we're talking about diversifying the faculty, when we're talking about increasing representation, it's not for you. It's not so that we will come into these white spaces and do the work that you could be doing if you really care. They're like, oh, let's bring more Black faculty so that our Black students will be comfortable. Okay, I get that. But you need to provide the support for the Black faculty to be able to do their work. Because they're the same people who will not take into consideration all this DEI work that we do. Because they'll be like, oh, she didn't publish enough. You know what? There's 24 hours in the day, okay? There's 24 hours in the day. And so if I spend 8 hours a week mentoring Black students, mentoring students who are poor, underprivileged, those 8 hours, you are using it to write your papers, to do your research, and then they consider that equitable. That's not equity. That is absolutely not equity. And then when we talk about the GRE, the MCAT, and advising students, especially Black students, students of color, to go to like graduate school and medical school, you always have these professors who are sitting there and reminding those students that, oh, those jobs are not for them. And they're not going to say why. They're going to use, again, this coded language, oh, your grades are not up to par. And so what I do now, I tell my students, I had a 22 in the MCAT. And at the time, you needed like a 32 or 34 to be able to be even considered for graduate school. I had a panic attack during the exam. But despite that, I had a medical school interview at freaking Harvard. So no, your grade does not determine whether or not you're going to get to medical school or whether or not you're going to go to graduate school. It's a package. You need to have advocates to basically say, this is what happens. This student is great. You know what I mean? Like, we need people to actually stand up. And this idea where you are in a committee and we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about, changing the rubrics and so on. And then you have the people who don't say shit, and then they come behind, they're like, Pascal, you had a good point. I'm like, then why did you not say that? Why did you not say that? Why did you not say that? Like, I don't smile anymore. I used to smile to be like, but now I tell you, you could have said the same thing. That would have given us power. The other problem with admission and then hiring practices, they would ask you to write a diversity statement. You sit on those committee and you look at the rubric and they don't even know what to evaluate. They don't even know what to evaluate. And it's like, oh, we're gonna ask the candidate to write this thing, and they have no idea what they're looking for. And I'm like, because you're gonna have somebody is gonna put, oh, I integrate, I have integrative pedagogy, and they don't provide a single example on how they do it. And you're gonna have a bunch of white people saying, oh, I think they are open-minded. No, they're not. There's no evidence that they actually know what they're talking about. As a matter of fact, you read the sentence and you're like, yeah, no, they're just using jargons here. I am so tired of this nonsense. And then here's another part where they love to say, oh, we are equitable. But as soon as you bring in some clear ideas of how to include people that have been excluded for so long, here's what they say. But we shouldn't lower the standard. And I said, do you know how hard I worked? I was a French speaking. I didn't understand English when I started college. Do you know how hard that shit is? Do you understand? And then you talk about lowering standard. I don't remember anybody lowering standards for me. I don't lower standards for my Black students. As a matter of fact, I hold them to a higher standard because I know what is awaiting them when they graduate. No. I think we really need to rethink what academia is, what medicine is, because those spaces were not created for us. Okay? They were not created for us. And now that we have a bit of a voice, they are trying to silence us with that stupid language. Oh, it's not a good fit. Your face is not a good fit. Your face doesn't even understand what teaching is. You are here because you didn't make it to a research institution.
Holy shit.
No, not for real, man. I am so pissed off. Like, I am so upset.
Dr. Gita, every week with the fire. She said your face is not a good fit.
No, I think I'm going to stop here. And, the final thing I really wanted to say is, you can chew gum and walk at the same time.
Right.
I understand that. I married a Serbian. He comes from a village where there's no Black people. If this man can marry a Black woman and be willing to change at the same time as it's making me happy, if you're an American, you can do it. Okay, because you've been living with Black people a lot. And so while you're working on yourself, remember that you are not the center of this issue. You are not the center. We're not going to wait for you to be able to give a good future for our people. We're not going to wait for you. And I feel like I've waited for so long because I was in this system where it was a bunch of white people and whatnot. And now that I'm trying to speak up, you have people who just either they unfollow me or they don't text me no more. Because I'm going to tell shit the way it is. If you voted for a Republican, I have no business. You have no business talking to me. I have no business talking to you, because what it means is that you don't like people like me, and you don't like people who are poor, who need help. And so to me, that's a Republican in academia, in medicine, in all of that summarizes what is wrong with us. That's it. I'm done.
Sister Pascal, always with the fire, always with the thunder and the lightning of justice and righteousness. And we always appreciated you, and you provide such incredible value of passion. You remind us that it's beautiful to be unapologetic and passionate in your purpose. And I always love and appreciate you for that. I want to pull out two things for Dr. Nakai to respond to. I mean, you said there's so much that you said. I just want to pull out two things, but Dr. Nakai, please feel free to respond as the spirit leads. I love that you said this. You people want to do committee, you want to get more data, but students are starving. I really glommed onto that. I love what you said about the reframing of the criteria. What is the standard? This standard, and that's what we've been talking about. These standards and criteria, what are they based on? What are the assumptions being made by these standards? What informs those assumptions? That's what we've been talking about. And we've reinforced, again, whiteness and white supremacism. By the way, while Dr. Nakai is responding, I'll be posting two important articles. One, well, first of all, I've been posting, pay attention to your Jumbotron, by the way, as always. And thank you. Shout out to Dr. Pascal and others who have been sending resources. But I'll be posting a document on white ignorance, the epistemology of ignorance, and that white ignorance, that it is, manufacturers produced. And so that Sister Lana made reference to that. And then also White Supremacy Culture by Tim Alkunja, the website. And I know that Dr. Nakai, Dr. Mason, and team have created a whole program around that too, that is still pending publication. So just paying attention to that. But I think those are very important when we talk about white supremacy culture. For those who may not know what we are referring to, you'll be able to reference that to understand, and you'll be able to identify, holy shit, this happens, that happens, this happens. That's why we can get shit done at my workplace, or at my school, or at my organization, or at my church, or at my mosque, or my temple, or wherever you at my house. Okay, because these are the cultural norms that we glorify and we embody, and we will talk about that at another time. But Sister Sunny, what was your takeaway from, again, a beautifully expressed rendition by Dr. Pascal, and especially that piece of what is that association between a highly discriminatory organization, right, and the way they treat their own, the way they treat their students, their trainees, their employees, their staff, right? Like, in my mind, there is a relationship between your students that are starving, your staff that go to the food pantry, and practices just within the operations of that committee or group or institution or organization, and the lack of equitable practices or results or outcomes that they're experiencing. Do you agree or not, or is there some nuance that I'm missing? And also whatever else touched you from what she said.
Dr. Pascal, always such a just gift to hear your poetry in motion. And I want to bring in something that Dr. Lana said, about if we're selecting for melanin and that is our outcome, right? That it's fine for us to just sort of continue as a status quo, and we just want to select some black and brown ornaments on this tree, right? My colleague, Dr. Williams, calls it a few chips in the cookie, and that's it, right? That's not what we're looking for. Which candidate brings us closer to justice, right? And which candidate has a track record of demonstrating investment in justice? I think we often put in these fluffy things like a diversity statement, but there's no rubric for it. And it can't disqualify you. What kind of freaking criteria is that if you cannot be disqualified by that thing? Well, I don't think it's a selection criteria then, right? It's like, so we want to know in advance if you're racist before we hire you? Is that the purpose of the diversity statement? Like, no, it needs to be built into the process in important ways. There's a couple of things that you said around one of the things that bias does, or that these associative bias in the sort of pool of white supremacism, is we confuse ability and performance, right? Your performance is not your ability. If Steph Curry has a bad game, sorry, Dr. Opara, this is a basketball player who's very talented. For those of you that aren't the sports, like, so if an athlete, maybe Michael Jordan, whatever, if an elite athlete, an Olympic athlete, an NBA athlete, whatever, has a bad game, people don't go, well, they're terrible, right? How they perform is not their ability, and it's also not their potential. And so we often, our talent across the universe of humans is absolutely there, but opportunity is not. And so we confuse experience and privilege and these other things with talent. That's not talent, right? So we have this gap, and Dr. Bonnie and I talk about this all the time. Well, you have to have experience in order to get an opportunity, but you're not going to get an opportunity unless you have experience. Guess what? All the white men who are chairs, all of them were chair for the first time at some point in their fucking careers, right? So why do we then have this differential standard? And so that's part of the strategy is, are we using a different standard here? And the other piece that you brought up around, we expect for faculty of color to do all the things and then still meet these standards of white supremacism, rather than asking the academy to value the contributions that we bring. Nurturing the next generation of amazing scholars should be part of what everyone is doing. The care and keeping of students should be part of what everyone is doing. And the gatekeeping around knowledge and what is valued in the academy, yeah, those things are built on structural bias around the, men, right? And how men have shaped their careers. People who identify as men have shaped their careers. And it often does not work for folks who don't meet that mold, but we've failed to change it. And what does it cost the academy? Talent. Lots and lots and lots of talent, to the point where we are very late to welcoming people within us that could actually help advance many of the causes of justice. So I think the reframes there are, how do we build in these pieces into our assessments so that not having an orientation towards justice, not having demonstrated elements of commitment can be disqualifying factors for candidates, right? Because that is how you really, and then can we look at people's what their demonstrated ability has been in the past based on the experiences and opportunities they've been afforded, and what is their potential, right? Because white people get selected on their potential, because that's how white supremacism works. You kind of have to prove that you don't deserve it, right? You have to try really hard to fail and be excluded. But then we use a completely different standard when it comes to people of color. And we say, well, you have to prove 10 times over. And then maybe even we're still going to be very skeptical and hire you on a probationary status, right? So we have to dig into what that bias looks like. And this practice is made more powerful when people with power at the table do it and use it and enact it, right? Because as you said, why tell me after the fact that you thought that was bullshit and racist? I already know that, right? You should have said it to the other people in the room who were not recognizing that in the moment, because then we could have wielded some power in that situation and created some change. So no, I will not give you your little badge. Good job. You recognized systemic racism in the committee meeting an hour ago. Like, that's not helpful, right? So doing it in the moment and galvanizing that courage in the moment to create that change. Hopefully these tools give people scripts and words and actual structural, things they can anchor to, where they can enact justice in these spaces. Because we don't just want to recognize, we don't just want to create awareness, we want to enact and engage justice in our committees and in these structures in our institutions.
Thank you, sis. Absolutely. We want to enact and engage justice in real time. And these are some of the tools that we can utilize. And the truth of the matter is, co-liberation requires sacrifice. And one of the things about whiteness, and again, that's why the first sort of step of healing for people in white bodies is to divest of whiteness. And there's a lot of work, there's whiteness studies, and there's a lot of work folks have been doing. There's nothing I'm saying that's new here. It's always ongoing. And again, I just tagged one document, how whiteness, the 5 refusals of white supremacy, how whiteness works. It's a very quick read, but it's based on the larger work of Charles Mills, a Black man who wrote it a while ago, The Racial Contract, and a woman, Andrea Gibbons, wrote a longer article. So you have this just way too much resources that you can utilize. And so I just want to encourage you, but that's a simple one. And this was written by a gentleman in response to the JAMA drama, where the editor talked about no physician is racist, so how can structural racism exist? And that whole business with that. So it's a very good read. If you've not been introduced, read everything that James Baldwin has written, because he is just the GOAT when it comes to whiteness scholarship, and just the breakdown of the psychology of whiteness and how it shows up, and how it impacted. But unlearning and divesting from whiteness is a key piece there. And one of the pieces of whiteness, it tells you that your social capital is everything. So don't speak up and cost yourself, like people to think some kind of way about you in public, but go behind and tell people that, yes, I witnessed your dehumanization and I said nothing. Because that's what I hear when people do that to me. So, Sister Pascal, you're not alone. What I hear is, yeah, I was a witness to your dehumanization, and I said nothing because it was too much. It was too much of an expensive cost for me to be seen some kind of way in public by these people. I want to be promoted. I want to be tenured. I want to be looked at as nice. I want to be the nice, this, that, and the other, whatever. I want my proximity to power to not be, tainted. But I just want you to know I'm an ally. So, I don't accept that, and keep walking. So but yeah, how do we engage and maintain our, and what I want to say is, again, it is a bidirectional dehumanization and humanization. If you are witnessing, right, the active dehumanization of another, and you stay silent, or you don't, you're not an upstander, you are also sacrificing your own humanity. And every time that happens, your humanity diminishes more and more. It becomes easier and easier to say nothing in the face of harm to others. Your own humanity is compromised each time. And that's why when Sister Lana says, I refuse to walk over somebody, in the street, because I'm not sacrificing my humanity, even in the face of a system that normalizes it. So thank you. That was just beautiful, for both of you. Dr. Nakai, I know you have travel and activities. At any time you need to just jet, sis. No worries. Just shoot me a text and jet. I don't want to keep you longer, but I appreciate your generosity of time. We'll be wrapping up shortly, so you're welcome to stay as long as you want and leave whenever you need. We love you and I appreciate you. And whenever you need to go, just go. Okay, we appreciate you. Our next speaker is Dr. Day, the amazing Dr. Day. I love this woman so much. She's just the epitome of action warrior woman. This is a woman that takes what she learns and she makes some big shit happen. You'll be like, I need you to do your own healing. She's like, that's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and heal the entire state of California. So that's like only Black women do. They just be like, that's okay. I got the state. That's all right. I got the country. Okay. That's okay. I got the hemisphere. I'll take care of it. But Dr. Day, how you doing? I missed you. I haven't heard your beautiful voice in a minute. And it's always a pleasure to have you at the round table. Please talk your talk.
Hey, lovely to be here. Thank you for that. My voice has been a bit parched I was a victim of this wonderful latest virus going around. So I've spent a couple of weeks now somewhat hoarse, but of course I continue to be hoarse because I keep talking. And just what you were saying, I have this mug in my office that has a quote on it, and it says, "Fuck it, I'll do it." Black women.
I love it. Oh my God.
Black women.
I'm ordering it now.
Right? Yes, a friend of mine ordered it for me. It was great. I also just wanted to say, Dr. Nakae, it is lovely to hear you, and let everyone else know, if you get the opportunity to interact more with her or to hear her speak or be involved in conversations. I've had the luxury of being involved in some work with her through the Society for Teacher and Family Medicine's Anti-Racism Collaborative, and have had the pleasure of hearing her speak at that site too. And so thank you so much for all the work that you do and continue to do, and the way that you really bring just a really straightforward, I mean, you boil down you boil down a lot of these concepts into just, I mean, just plain language. And I really love and appreciate that about you. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, particularly, is that when it comes to things like admissions and selections, it takes time. And it takes meaningful time. And if your institution is not doing that, and your institution is not diversifying its population and changing its culture, then your process is designed to give you exactly that result.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I've said this in this space before. This is a very over 100 years old quality improvement, concept that every system is specifically and absolutely designed to get the results that it gets. It's in the design. And so one of the things that we need to do, as you all were saying, is we need to look at that system and redesign that system. It's in the construct where I am, where we're in the middle of residency interviews and residency selection. Our program directors have, for years now, just made it clear that this requires time. And so there is 1 week, 8 to 5, that is set aside by our program directors, Monday through Friday, to read every frickin' application. There is no automatic, score cutoff. There is no automatic, if you don't have XYZ, your application doesn't get read. Every single application gets read. And then, though, the scoring is based on just those things that exclude people historically. So people's lived lives, people's path traveled, those things are honored. And until you actually get to a point where you are making those kinds of substantive changes in your process, you will continue to get the results that you get. And Dr. Pascal, thank you always for your fire. I just want to remind you, I'm right here in the Bay Area with you, girl. So reach out whenever, however you need folks to be present for your students, because I've got a whole bunch of, again, because of very explicit and very specific moves that we've made in the way that we discuss hirings. I spent most of my life as the only in my academic career, and now I'm one of 5.
Mm.
And that's all within the last 6 years. Because of those changes. So I got people for you, my girl. I got people for your students, and do reach out. And thank you, everybody else, for fighting the fight.
Thank you, sis. I appreciate and love you. And, Dr. Nakae, she had to jit. She's traveling. She's doing so many things. And we're so grateful for her and everything that she just shared in this space. So thank you, Dr. Day. That was, amazing. And thank you for, again, and Dr. Pascal, she said it. This system wasn't designed for us. So it requires intentional interruption in order to get a different result. Otherwise, it's just going to keep getting the result that it was designed to get. So that was just perfectly stated. And again, this is why this community is what it is that we can reach out to each other. This is not just a Twitter thing. This is a real life thing, right? We live close to each other, and sometimes we travel. We're in each other's neighborhoods, and we support each other offline in very real ways. And so thank you so much for that offer. And Dr. Pascal, Dr. Day is everything. She is definitely a woman that you want to know and be around. And I know she has so much support for you. And for all of us in this space, same thing. I want to shout out Dr. Abdullahi that's here. Yes, sis. And I don't know how early you came on, but I was shouting out Black Ocular Series, and this is the creator of Black Ocular Series in Toronto Metropolitan University. And myself and Sister Lana were there dropping gems on the intersection of artificial intelligence, Black feminism, and race correction. And also we tied in, she was able to lead us in a reflection around the mental health piece and why that's critical. And we started to lift up, African intelligence and ancestral intelligence as the new AI. So I just want to shout her out and her leadership with that. And there's a tweet with her website that you can follow the amazing work they're doing. Just tremendous work. So thank you, Dr. Abdullahi, for being here at this time. Sister Lana, do you have anything to respond to what Dr. Stay said before we move to Sister Java Dawkins?
No, I just want to say, as always, brings such a wonderful energy and set of knowledges, and reminding us always that, as you said, we are in different geographies. Sometimes we visit, sometimes we live near to each other, and it's important to build our networks. And those mitigation strategies include ourselves, mitigating against the ongoing onslaught and the ways in which we are terrorized routinely. And while, we may, get in there and do the work and look like we're fine, but we know it wears on us, right? We know it wears on us. So it's important to reach out and to think about the architecture of the systems and which systems we want to protect and ensure that they are not corrupted in the future. Because we've seen time and time again that as we make advances, the white lash doubles down.
Right.
Right. And so how do those mitigation strategies, like the kinds that Dr. Nakae has put in place, and how are the ones that we're putting in place by being on air and having conversations to bring people into the community, how do we strengthen the infrastructure and the architecture of the counter systemic interventions that we've come to create? And many of them are unique to the specific disciplines we work in, because each specialized area of white supremacy has its own set of institutions, gods, and idols. And so it takes a lot of work and a lot of ingenuity and a lot of innovation for many of us to think through and around to get people through and to sites of safety so that they can practice their professions in a way that is not harmful. Mm-hmm. So I think it's great, and I just want to keep encouraging people to think about that and to contribute to that. And I also dropped an article in your DMs to post, and it's just an example of how they use the language of bias in artificial intelligence, and it breaks down literally how they bought that language so that we would be forced to use a coded frame. And the same thing has happened in medicine. I just think these articles are useful because they're cross-disciplinary, because to your point of the doctor shortage, they ain't planning on filling with doctors, honey. That's it's going to be robots in real time this and real time that. Sorry, they dropping the human in the loop. We almost have no humans in the loop, despite all the conversation about it. So it'll be a different kind of medicine, but that's another show for another day.
That's gonna be a whole different show. But I appreciate you, Sister Lana. Sister Dawkins, please, the floor is yours. Talk your talk.
Hello. My name is Denise Dawkins. I'm a assistant professor at San Jose State University. I'm a nursing professor. And when you talk about white supremacy, the only thing that's missing from nursing is the white hood, because they wear the white dress. And so all they do is they teach the students, we look at Florence Nightingale's, like she's like Queen Elizabeth, you know what I mean? And she was the biggest colonizer there ever was. They don't teach the students about Mary Seacole, the Jamaican nurse that had a hospital, that had a storefront, and it's just crazy. And what I want people to understand is black students in nursing is getting lower and lower and lower. They set it up so you have to have straight A's. And what kills me about that, there's no proof that makes you a better nurse, and that you can like make that work, make you confident. And, and you talk about supporting Black faculty. I had to leave an institution in Central California because I started speaking up, because I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of being nice. So I spoke out and I filed the racism. And of course they turned it around, and I was being, they lied on me as usual. And I was being the typical, violent, which was not true, obviously. But we got to think about, like, so when Black students want to get into nursing school, they now they used to be able to get into community colleges. And that's not happening anymore. They have to go to the for profits where they get they pay exorbitant amount of money to be in those schools, and their grades are their units are not transferable. It's crazy, and about, Thomas, I forgot about this. He's a recipient of affirmative action, so he's got his nerve.
He's got all the nerves. He got the entire nervous system. Okay, central
Right.
and peripheral.
Right. Well, the American Nurses Association made this big Twitter announcement. It was on TV, how they were so sorry and blah, 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 blah. But the scary part is, if you look at why Stacey Abrams didn't win, who voted Republican? White women. Who are nurses? White women. So don't, and then they had the nerve to say, oh, you should forgive me. Kiss my ass, bitch. No, you should be begging for me. But, it's just like they hold up this gatekeeping stuff. Like, I actually, I got to say this because I'm so proud of myself, or proud of the student. One of the Black Student Association at San Jose State said, hey, I have the student trying to get in a nursing program. She had friggin' straight A's in science. She had a B in communication. She was told she wasn't going to get in. Guess why she got that B in communication? I asked her, I said, just tell me, why did you get a B? You got an A in microbiology and chemistry. How'd you get a B in communication? And it wasn't like a slight. She says, oh, he didn't like the way I talked. I'm like, what the hell? So that is the reason why grades don't count, because they're biased. It's like catch-22. Like, you get teachers that mark Black students down, or Black students fart crooked, and they try to put them in jail, or they file against them, so that can get them. It starts at grade school.
It starts across the entire course. Thank you so much, Sister Dawkins. I appreciate the your offering. And Sister Lana, I want to bring you in here. Sister Dawkins is talking about structural bias, right? This structural discrimination, in other words, and the way and she's bringing up a whole different texture that we did not unpack, which is when it comes to retaliation, when it comes to discipline. Right, so we're talking about every area in the ecosystem of healthcare. She's naming nursing, which is her profession, and like we said, what we're talking about here is not just medicine. This is nursing, this is speech therapy, this is occupational therapy, this is pharmacy, this is social work, this is we said physical therapy, respiratory therapy, this is medical assistant, whatever the ecosystem. This is in hospital management and leadership, okay, across the ecosystem of healthcare and beyond. Every field can relate to this, but wherever and whatsoever there is opportunity and there is a place in society to occupy, this applies. And absolutely, the lack of diversity in nursing is, again, a system acting as designed. 100% is not accidental. And it's the similar reflection as in medicine. Absolutely. So I just am really touched by that piece, and the piece around the structural where structural racism and structural white supremacism showing up in the bias of the ways in which retaliation and discipline is carried out, the ways in which they go to the same old tired ass tropes of aggression and violence, and I don't know what else they say. Then they go to, we were late, we didn't do our job, we were unprofessional. Holy child, should we have a whole conversation around when we talk about coded language, professional and professionalism, and how it's weaponized against particularly Black and brown professionals? Okay, we're talking about the people that have to go through a whole process before they leave their house to be the most professional that as they can in an inherently violent spaces. And you talk about professionalism. Who else got to do that every blessed day just to do their job? So I'm just wondering if we can have a brief response, and then we'll go to Michelle And then, Sister Pascal, I see your hand up, so you give a little brief response so that we can close. I want to close before 4 o'clock today, and so let's go ahead, Sister Lana, if there's any response before we go to
So
Michelle.
I'm in motion, so forgive if you hear background noise. I think the point that the sister just spoke to in terms of nursing and the movement to the 4-year program was not actually about the increase of standards, because you could have done that and maintained those other pathways into the profession. We've seen the same thing in Canada, and this is what I talk about, hyper-professionalization. And so we've seen that happen across a number of areas in the health continuum, healthcare continuum, and professional continuum. And the logic has been in each of these times that this is about improving the clinical care standards, but in fact, there's no evidence that that's actually happening. And we can tell that by looking at the actual errors that happen in practice and whatnot. So what we know is that that's not the right solution because they haven't named the actual problem. And the problem is that ultimately, these are tools to cultivate an aesthetic and a type of workforce to maintain a particular type of culture. Because when we say that in order to enter a profession that people have been serving in for the longest time and doing an excellent job, that all of a sudden you need to take on the debt load of a 4-year program as it is in the US, that will definitely restructure nursing and again address the kinds of struggles that we've seen in nursing for a very long time, which is the ways in which white women in these roles wield ultimate forms of violence. Mm-hmm. And that is true in Canada because we have some very good books written about Black women in nursing who have moved throughout the British colonies, been trained to a higher standard than most white nurses here as a result of that British training, and then only to be held back and treated poorly and to be actually intentionally injured. And I would also, query how many Black women, at least on the Canadian side, we can see, who have seen their mothers and aunties be nurses, who still want to be nurses. And I say that in this frame. Having had conversations with several, it's like, I've watched these people try to break my mother's back, literally. Having come home from near misses where white nurses have literally released a patient on them so that the actual lift would fall back. And so retaliation is not just in the table in which someone says, as they did to the sister, oh, you are this or that, and so flipping it back on them, but retaliation happens at the site of work, literally at the bedside. Mm-hmm. And so in Canada, what we're also seeing is a restructuring of what they want as the acceptable person. And so historically, a large number of the nurses have been Black nurses educated in the British Empire to higher standards and then imported to Canada. And then when in country, done a great job and risen as well, but also held back. And so if we look at one of the structural retaliations is that we've seen that white nurses no longer want to be challenged by Black women. So as we've seen in other sectors, they simply try to close the gate and try to deal with what they consider the next, quote, non-white, quote, population that they think they can control. And we're seeing the Filipino nurses who are now being brought in to do the work that Black nurses did in the vast majority, struggle from the very similar kinds of nuances, except different tropes. So they're expected to be more quiet, more accepting of being bullied, less likely to speak out. And, when they begin to understand and get their legs and realize, ooh, this ain't going to stop. They're just going to keep doing it. They're never going to let me out. Then we find them having conversations with the more mature Black nurses who are often protecting them on the floor, and in the worst case scenario, being set against each other. So this is, again, how white supremacy structures the site of work, which determines how racial capitalism works. Because if you can't survive your 40 hours a week and get your paycheck because of white terrorism, they are definitely using that to their advantage because it determines what's possible for you economically, what voting district you're going to be gerrymandered into or out of, and how motivated you will be to participate in the political systems that have control, or at least some control over your life. So none of this is actually just about work. This is about how white supremacist societies maintain their structural power, and that is at the place that you have to check into 30 to 70 hours a week in order to make your daily bread. So what the sister talked about is on point, but we have to understand that this has no correlation to actual quality improvement. The data doesn't support it. Neither does the information. And number two, we have to understand as part of a larger struggle for white supremacy to maintain its power and to maintain a culture of violence, especially in, quote, the caring professions, which don't take care of anybody at this point in time, unfortunately, but the interests of those who already have more than they've ever attempted to even earn.
And that's the bottom line. I really do think, us asking that question, wait a minute, this criteria, how is it related to being a good doctor again? How is it related to being a good nurse again? So what is the fact that I'm able to pay for test taking, like, strategies and supplemental materials or extra tutoring or any of the sort of markers of privilege? Remind me the evidence that shows that that those doctors, those nurses, those speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, pharmacists, social workers, veterinarians, and dentists, don't forget the teeth people, okay, are better, do better, save more lives, cure more disease, invent more solutions, because there is none. So, what is this truly in service of? What is the function? To exclude a particular type of people from our cast. And so, with that, thank you, Sister Lana. Michelle, go ahead. Michelle, are you there? You might need to unmute.
I lost my page. I wanted to thank everyone who spoke. They were very articulate. But I also noticed, and I hope I have permission to say this. I'm sorry, but can you not say articulate?
Dr. Pascal, I was going to get it. You're okay. Let her finish, and then we will take a moment to educate.
What's wrong with articulate?
Michelle, Michelle, complete your thought, and then we will respond. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Everyone expressed themselves very well. There were three very important people who I think have had vast shifts in thinking and have published. One is Sophie Williams, who wrote Anti-Racist Ally. I have her book right in front of me, and it's phenomenal. And in great part, I heard this on another space, that white people need to be much more active in speaking up to white people when there's social injustice. And it can be based on race, religion, LGBTQ. It can be obesity. I can't tell you how many people in the health field, of course it's the health field, discriminate against obese staff. But we need to never be silent when something unjust has happened in meetings. I had brought up in our medical meetings on a number of occasions. Of course, we were doing Zoom, and I said, boy, does this look white or is this just me? And tell me about articulate, please, before I go on.
Well, only because of the time, I just want to give you a chance to just get your thoughts out so that we can wrap up with that. You know what I mean?
This sounds a little bit about like time crunch.
Okay, Michelle, I'm gonna move you to listener so that we can wrap up the space, and because let's see here.
It's unfortunate that you didn't.
Okay. See, this is why I'm always careful with white folks in this space. This happens almost all the time. There's some version of this every blessed week, and it's just too much. Like even when they appear as liberal, as we know, these are the ones we run away from. 440 Nigerians will say we run 440. The most liberal, most seemingly open-minded are the worst all the time. God damn it. Lana, do you wanna respond?
I think what I'll do is just interject with kind of coming back to where we started, which is when it comes to how we intervene, which is what we had, were some beautiful interventions provided by Dr. Nakae, and how we talk about bias. that in fact what we're doing is we're interrupting 500 years of structural violence, and that when we do that, we have to be very clear about the criteria, right? We have to be clear about the criteria we're enforcing and the criteria we're disallowing, and what kinds of voices will be prioritized. Because fundamentally, when we have power and we're being biased, we're on the path to actual legal framed discrimination. And that we always have to keep in mind that it's not about what one likes to do or one would like to participate in justice, but it's a requirement. And the more we fall away from understanding it's a requirement, the more we move into whether someone morally or ethically feels like it, as if we're having a favor done. And that's not what's happening. What's happening is we are in a society that is on both sides of the border to some degree falling apart because of what white supremacy and white terrorism looks like. And that we have a choice. We have a choice to change that and to be intentional about why we're changing it and what we're changing it over to. It's not about increasing the representation of the number of Black and brown and otherwise folks, regardless of religion or sexual orientation, who will mimic and embody these systems. It's not about populating these systems, whether it's medicine, nursing, pharmacology, rehabilitation sciences, clinical investigation sciences. It's not about diversifying them and adding some chips, as one said, to the cookies. It's about fundamentally changing what we're making and what we're eating. There ain't no white flour up in here. There ain't gonna be no slave produced cocoa and chocolate and under fair traded. We're actually going to change the entire thing that's on the menu. And so I think one of the key things that is valuable here is that when we understand that it's not just about white folks speaking up, it's about them dismantling the thing that they designed for their own best interests, and us coming up with the thing that's most importantly valuable to all of our interests, not our capital interests, but our interests to survive on this planet that is being dissolved. And that by respecting the indigenous lands that we're on, the knowledges and the structures, and that replacing that, not with equitable paths to capitalism that is literally killing all of us, but to an entire different system otherwise that takes account for the vast amount of knowledge. And as Pascal said, the amount of research that has been done on each and every one of these areas that sits on shelves, unused, unread. We need not continue to beat a dead horse. We need to get to the process of building those new systems. And these strategies are what I call in the meantime. They get us from where we are to where we need to be. So therefore, the meantime, and that we need to create the structures and the architecture that will protect against them so that they are not turned against us. Because as we saw, and I'm bringing this example because largely U.S. audience, we saw how the Supreme Court was able to turn around and they said it's not just Roe versus Wade, but Brown versus the Board of Education. They said it's on their roster. So we know that we have to protect against this. And if the Supreme Court of the United States of America does not have protections in place, then we know that it is up to us, the people, regardless of borders, to figure out what those protections are so that things aren't turned back against us and that we experience even more white lash than is already being produced.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for really breaking that down. I want to sort of like deconstruct what just happened and, offer anyone space to sort of, if you want to process this Michelle's situation, I'm going to make space for that and then close the space. Dr. Pascal, I know you had something you wanted to share in regards to the topic, but actually you want to close the space from that for now. And take a moment because I'm actually activated and I want to sort of process that a little bit. I'm extremely annoyed because you are a white woman and you come into this predominant. That's why every single week I go through the long ass introduction to really set the stage of what this space is, who it's for, and who it's targeted at. Yes, we talk about these issues amongst ourselves, but the center is not teaching white people. And I know, Dr. Pascal, because of where you are located, it is a target of oftentimes, you're like, white people, I'm going to tell you this. And that's fine. You have a space to do that. I don't do that because I do not say, I'm not here to teach white people. I'm not here to, you want to be in this space and listen, great, like absolutely. But my focus, my energy, my investment is inside of Blackness and Black folks. And we need this information too amongst ourselves. We need to learn these things amongst each other because we're all born into the system of white supremacism. And many of us are doing the work of healing and unlearning ourselves. So it's not just, you don't just get born Black and conscious, right? You get born Black. Right, or and labeled Black, and then you get exposed to all the things that come with that label inside of an anti-Black world. However, so these conversations are amongst us for that, but we're not here to educate Black people, and you are not here to co-opt the agenda that we should pause our process in order to talk to you. And this is where I started getting activated. You take something that we learn, we're teaching each other, and turn it to use against us, which is that she said, well, this now sounds like time crunch. How many of y'all have been in the rooms when these goddamn DEI conversations and stupid, like, goddamn DEI and bias, whatever the hell training they throw at us, right? And these motherfuckers learn new terms and then turn around and use it against you because they have not done step one, which is identify and divest from whiteness. That's why we talk about you got to do your own internal work. Don't come into this space. This lady came into this space and already raised her hand demanded to speak from the beginning of the conversation. You know good and well, we take time to wrestle and massage amongst ourselves on the round table before we open it up, and then you can say what you got to say. She already came into this space to have some things to say. She did not come with humility to listen and learn and grow. And this is that violence. This is that violence. This is that violence. And then when we say, okay, we just want our own space, affinity space to be who we are, some white folks start to feel some kind of way. But see how y'all act? Do you see how you all act? And she out here talking about white people need to advise white people. Before you even advise other white people, you need to advise the white person in the mirror. Y'all got to do your own healing work. You don't do your healing work. You don't name whiteness. You don't name your own internalized white supremacy and the way you're complicit in just you. Then you come out here and you just expel violence with impunity and then act like the fucking victim. How dare you? How dare you? You come into this space. This is not your space. And if I tell you, finish your thought, I even give you the room to finish speaking, and then we will deal with it. You interrupted to demand that we stop and teach you. Are you serious? And then you say this is time crunch. Motherfucker, you get the fuck out. Who do you know? Do you know who you're talking to? You think when I introduce all these people as divine entities, I'm just talking shit? These are divine entities. We are goddesses and gods for our kings in the space. When we tell you, do this, do it. It will work out in your interest. But you got to trust and submit in the moment. And don't pause to co-opt the moment, co-opt the agenda, and then be mad, and then turn. And this is where your whiteness got activated, baby. You took a term you just learned and turned it to weaponize against the folks, not realizing that, again, you are occupying the space of power as a white woman. Sister Lana just broke down a bit of the pathology of white womanhood, and you just did it. You did the very thing. Well, you did the very thing. Do not do this, because it's like you came into my home. I opened the door. Oh, come in. Yeah, have some tea. Here, yeah, some of our friends and family, we're hanging out. We're just having conversation, right? In the living room, right? And then you interject into the conversation. And then we say, you know what? Pause. Or, you know what? Just, continue your point, and then we'll address. And then you start trying to sort of control the conversation of the person who is hosting you and gave you tea. because you're liberal and woke. Every time, y'all, I'm not lying to you. Every single time, I don't even let see. That's why I'm in this space. I'm in this space not just as a teacher, as a facilitator, as a community member. I'm also a student, because I'm also needing to do my own unlearning. Every time any of them come in this space, they show their ass in some way. Y'all have been here, Lana. You've seen it, Pascal. Every single time, Dr. Day, no matter how, like, okay, this one may be a good one. And then they're not. So I don't know what to do. Do I say, well, that's it, all white folks bad? No, because why? For what? Why? Like, what is that energy about? Who is it? Or do I don't know. What do y'all want to do? This is your community. But that behavior is just not tolerated. And maybe we add in some community agreements to the introduction. If y'all have any thoughts, come on and speak on it, and or DM me, and or email me, and or call me, and or text me. You already know how to get a hold of me. But this is ridiculous. This is just ridiculous. This is part of like my healing. I look forward to these moments every week. I'm like, yeah, hey Mark, I'm about to get and then someone comes and just shits in the church. I'm done. Whoever wants to speak, just kind of raise your hands. We'll just take a few minutes, because I still am intentional about the justice practice of ensuring we have time to take care of ourselves and enjoy a Saturday. Okay, that's still critical. But Dr. Day, go ahead.
I just want to thank you for being an amazing moderator, and for just all of the deconstruction that you just did, because I think that is healing for so many people in this space with what just happened, and that you are holding us right now in a way that is greatly appreciated, and that just thank you.
Thank you, my love. I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate that. I thank you. Thank you. Pascal?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Dr. Day just said. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I interjected, because this is when I realized that I really need to do work on myself. Like, I was literally triggered by that. Like, I was like, did she just say articulate? Like, I'm sorry, but this is one of those words, and there's not a lot of white people in this space anyway, so I'm not gonna break it down, but you all know what I'm talking about, right? Articulate is a word that they've used to discriminate against people that are not like them. So I was really triggered. But anyway, what I wanted to bring back was what Dr. Huck said from Jose about the nursing thing. And Ijoma, you also mentioned that there's this they're complaining that there's a physician shortage or nursing shortages, right? But at the same time, I don't think when they think about shortage, they think about us, right? Because there are many people that don't look like white people who are interested in these careers but are kept outside. And I just wanted to give you this two little example really quickly. I was teaching clinical microbiology, and it's a course that is required for pre-nursing students to even get into nursing. And literally, it is a readout course, right? So when I learned that, I'm like, I am not going to sit here and teach a course that will basically prevent people from achieving their dreams, right? And there's a whole nother level of that. So I talked to my dean, and I said, I need to revamp this course, but you cannot make a student take clinical microbiology without a single biology course, without a single chemistry course. This is literally setting them to fail, right? So this is one of those institutionalized biases and gatekeeping that is there, and they want us to participate in it. And this is just BS. And whenever you raise your voice against it, it's like, oh, this is how it's always been done. Well, I'm not going to participate in this hypocrisy of whatever it is that you guys are doing. And so I requested not to teach that course anymore, because on top of that, it is a course that is known to reduce the faculty evaluation, right? And we already know evaluation is biased. And as a Black woman teaching this course, they knew that my evaluation would be low because, again, the student gets frustrated because the material is hard and they're not prepared to take it. So it's like this vicious cycle to prevent the professor to do their job and to basically gatekeeping those students. My sister is a surgical nurse, right? And she would tell me all sorts of things that white patients have told to her, like the most demeaning things. And this is one reason why, like, you go to the hospital, and I'm sorry, but I value the nurses more than the doctors, because they actually the one who take the time to talk to you. Doctors come in, they do their thing, like 2 seconds, they go, how are you doing? What are your symptoms? And then they go away, they come back with the prescription. Sometimes they don't even come back with the prescription. The nurse is gonna come explain it to you. I mean, come on, you know? And they get a lot more money than regular nurses, than the nurses. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, you know, these institutionalized biases and gatekeeping are real, and sometimes they're not even big, right? They're in the little things. They're in the little things. We have a shortage of nurses. No, you don't. You just refuse to train the people, all the kind of people who are interested in this career path. You just want to train a specific type of people. That's why you have a shortage. Right?
That's right.
Because white people are going to be the minority, or they're going to be the minority in America, right? So now you will be forced to teach people that don't look like you. So all of a sudden, your shortage is going to be real in not only medicine or nursing, right? It's going to be real everywhere else. Like right now, postdocs and PhD students are demanding a raise. But the reason this problem is happening is because now you have a lot more regular people. You have a lot more people who are not millionaire or trust fund baby getting into those PhD programs. And they need money to live. How can you live on a $20,000 or $40,000 $1,000 a year in the Bay Area? I mean, here, like a hole costs like $1,500, $1,800, like a hole. Okay? And so, you know, all this talk of DEI and they're taking their time and they're going to come over here talking about articulate and time crunch. No, it's not getting in their head. And I think we really need to be vocal and we need to ask. And when we demand, this is the last thing I want to say, when we demand what we want, I think we need to be very precise.
Yeah.
Because at this day, the students demanded a Black center. You know what they did? They literally gave them a room with nothing else, no support. And then when we went back and we said, well, we wanted a center that was actually furnished, you know, couches and advisors and things like that, they're like, well, you guys rented a center, we gave you a room. What else do you need from us? So whenever we demand, we need to be specific. We need to kind of like break it down from them, like A, B, C, D, so that we can go back and say, well, you gave us A, B, but you didn't give us C and D. So your work is not done. And
no, I completely support that. I think, you know, again, really emphasizing language is powerful, and the way to use language is powerful. I'm all about explicit language. I mean, to the point of being annoying, but you have to say what you mean and ask for what you need. Lana says this all the time. Ask for what you need specifically and explicitly. And that takes a lot. It takes courage to do that oftentimes, but there's courage in community, and we have that. And so I appreciate you really bringing in that. Also, power of language. We don't have a shortage, or we don't have a magical shortage. We have a manufactured, produced shortage. There's a reason for this shortage, right? Your exclusionary practices and processes produce this so-called shortage. So your institutional gatekeeping and discriminatory practices rooted in bias, rooted in white supremacism produce this shortage. So you're absolutely right, and that language is key. I also wanted to say, you don't have to apologize. This is your home, this is your space, this is your round table. If you were activated, because I was activated too, if you could see me on the video, if you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter Live, my eyes went big. And as you can see, I'm wearing one of my large frame glasses. And so my eyes, I think, matched the size of my glasses for a second there. My approach was to pause and let her finish speaking, and then, highlight for the room, for the space, what the challenges in that language, again, speaking about language is powerful, right, was, and why many of us were activated. Your approach was to interject immediately. Neither is right and neither is wrong. It was just what it was. There's no need to apologize. There's no right or wrong way to have interrupted that moment. It's just the choice that we make given where we're at mentally, spiritually, politically, right, for the tools that we have to engage in that moment. We make choices out of these places, and mine is a little bit different from yours. So you made that choice and I made mine, and it's not, none is wrong or right. So please don't apologize. This is your room, your house. So be comfortable and feel free. So I just wanted to name that for you. I don't want any Black person in this roundtable AMR to ever feel uncomfortable to be who they are, because whiteness, unchecked whiteness is roaming around in the moment, which, by the way, I should be the one apologizing for even opening the gate to that. So with that being said, Sister Lana, I would like to round up this room. Thank you. It has been outstanding conversation. Sister Lana, what are your remarks? And then I will summarize and bring it to a close.
I want to say thank you, Ijeoma. Thank you. That was a lot. When I jumped into the gap, I was like, there's two ways to cut this cake. And mine was to just shut that energy out. Because part of how whiteness works, right? It's designed to trigger us. It's designed to take us off our path. And to suck the life out of us. And I could hear it. Like when you even gave the room, I was like, oh, sister got some faith today. You were like, let me share my generosity and spirit. And I was just like, let's see. And I think quite honestly that woman, it needs to do her work. We talked about what might we do? I don't know. Maybe this is where the folks that say that they are, in collaboration with us, maybe that's where we have, our little resident white lady who helps manage these people and takes them off to the side and talks to them, because that's not our work to do. And I'm privileged to have white folks like that I work with. That if this was the Canadian space, that I'd be like, okay, you need to go deal with that, because it's not me. And to vet them, because I think you're right. Ban it for what? That's energy that we have to spend. But again, there's work to be done that is not our work as Black women to do. We have upheld and managed the need of white women in particular to be educated at our expense for literally centuries. And for that white woman, I would not doubt it if to her what she did made complete sense.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure she's out there subtweeting and being a hot mess, because that's what they all do. Every single last one. So I'm pretty sure, I'm not gonna check in on that or anything, because that's way beneath me. But that's what has happened, and that's what happens. And so yeah, she's 100% in her mind. She's right. We victimized her, we violated her, we abused her, we bullied her. Name all those names, all the coded language for Black women violence. Those angry Black bitches. Threw me out the room and did a girl. We've watched this movie and we've been in the movie. We've been in the movie so many times. And so yes, in her mind, she is right. And not only is she right and did nothing wrong, but we have harmed her. And then there's probably going to be a whole slew of DEI language that will be unleashed in and weaponized again. Girl, please. Girl, bye.
Right? And that's where I say, ultimately, we all know what happened. We know the language that she's been trained in, because we know that culture is something that is learned. It is embedded in us. And I just want to say, girl, I am so sorry that she, tried to jump up in here like that. And more importantly, that you had to manage her. And I think that what's the lesson for us is we be doing this fight every day. And even though you do as best as you can to boundary, I try to support you in that. We all do. The reality is that the thing in which we struggle against, that is surrounding us on all sides, we do a pretty exceptional job, but I want to remind you, do a damn exceptional job of keeping this space pro-Black, pro-positive, solution-based, a place where we can come together in a meeting of the minds. And from time to time, something to sneak in, but let's not get it twisted. This space has been consistently one that has been protected, and you can only do the best that you can. And you did that, and I am deeply sorry that. And it's funny because I'm just thinking about when she was talking, I was like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. I was just like, just gracious, stop right there. And when she said time search, I was like, God dang it.
Oh yeah, she went. Yeah, she did it to herself. She did it to herself. But
that, she would have ended with the thing about the book and whatever.
Yeah.
And been like, and said, I'm sure I appreciate that you are on guard because I can only imagine with white women like me and others have done in your space. So thank you for the opportunity. That would have been a gracious departure to acknowledge the tension that her presence brings, and that she was walking a line. Because so often we as Black people, particularly as Black women, and often as the only one in the room, are forced to be in places that are so hostile, the air is thick enough to cut.
That's right.
And we have to manage that. We have to keep our poker face on. We have to do all kinds of things in these insufferable spaces that these white women and men and people rarely ever have to learn or come to know how to manage. And so they always give the excuse about why they don't know how to conduct themselves, as they say in mixed company. But we somehow must magically know from the time we're in diapers exactly how to make sure that all of our white and powerful people are comfortable at all times in our presence. So as not to jeopardize our physical safety, our psychological wellness, and our economic stability. And so if this woman is listening, and others like her, I want you to pay attention to that. Why don't you have the skills to come into a Black space, to open your mouth and ask and say thankful that you got up on the air, to indicate whatever your level of skill is or not, and then to graciously accept and to acknowledge the tension that you bring? Why don't you have those skills at this ripe age in your life? Why don't you have them? And why do you think that we are responsible for creating the space for you to do that? And that's a good question for us to share with any of our colleagues whom are around us. Why don't you have those skills? Because I have to. We have to teach them. To our little Tuli, my nephew ain't even, and we already got to be teaching that, because we don't want you to catch a bullet. We don't want you to catch a jail sentence, all because some white person or some person of color in power who's engaged in white logic decides that you, quote, don't know your place. So I just want to remind us that, girl, you've been doing a good job keeping this place pro-Black. And that is that lady's problem, not ours. So I hope everybody had a wonderful time today, despite the fact that, Monday to Friday came into our Saturday.
You're right. No, thank you. I appreciate
just a little levity.
No, thank you. And you know what? It's all love. And you see, again, this is what whiteness does, right? And takes, but again, yes, we will recenter in a minute. I'll summarize the space and we will recenter, because that is what it's all about. And my joy right now is community with every single one of y'all, my brothers and sisters and siblings. And that's what I choose to focus on. And thank you for that love and Dr. Day's beautiful blessing. I'm so glad this is recorded because I can go back to it. And Sister Lana, of course, every single one of you. And you know what? This is what we deal with, all of us, right? Like in our various spaces. This is not an exempt situation, unfortunately. And my hope and prayer is that some kind of way, subconsciously, something was demonstrated right now that has been a blessing, has provided some tools, some language, some strategies for us to navigate the real world when these kind of things happen. That's what I'm hoping. I can't articulate it for you right now. But I hope that as you reflect on today's conversation and then this particular incident, that and that's we're teachers, we're professors on this stage, and so as a professor, I can't help but see the learning opportunity right inside of this, and it's like, okay, so right, for next time, what are some tools I can utilize to protect and preserve my humanity and my myself? How can I protect and preserve that of another person if I witnessed it happen to them? How can I teach my children, my mentees, my trainees to do that themselves should such a situation arise? So ultimately this is that learning opportunity, because we still live in the world of folks that haven't done their again, the majority of the people that are in this country or this part of the world, but again, we are the one majority in the world, the actual world. But these folks that have and consolidate power amongst themselves, that haven't done that work of divesting of whiteness, divesting of white supremacism, how do I navigate spaces where they are all over the place, right? And they are expressing it, they're shedding it all over the place, and constituting these structural barriers to opportunity and success. They're constituting these structural barriers to admissions, and assigning value and allocating resources. How could we navigate these spaces? Perhaps, hopefully, this moment may have shed some light in how to do it. If there's any one thing I could distill it down to in terms of a tool, is community. The blessing is that I'm in this space with Dr. Pascal and Lana and Sister Dawkins and Dr. Day, and I see my wonderful mentee here, Dr. Rashid. Thank you for being here. Dr. Brian, he came back. Brother Bobby, and the list goes on. Dr. Abdullahi. Thank you for all the people that are DMing me and your love. Listen, that's my joy. That's my life source, is just Black community, Black love. I mean, that's how I live, because this kind of stuff, is all the place. It's just the rudeness of it. It's just so rude, though. Into it's our house. Anyway, and so with that in mind, thank you again for the love I receive and bask in it. This has been a conversation talking about breaking biases and breaking barriers, and does it lead to representation? I really love the reinforcement that Dr. Pascal and Sister Lana sort of highlighted around when we look at the criteria and we look at the so-called quote unquote standards for admission, for promotion, for retention, for disciplining or not disciplining, for opportunities, right, for scholarships, or for grants and funding and whatever is out there. Those opportunities, those allocation resources, who are they meant for? What were they built on? What assumptions are being made that again are rooted in white supremacism and anti-Blackness, right? And with the function of excluding, right, non-white bodies, disabled, queer, femme, women bodies, okay, and of course people that hold multiple identities, right? That ultimately that's the goal, the function, right? Because the system only acts as designed. Right. So these shortages, this so-called healthcare worker shortages, the language is off, and language is powerful. We talked about that. The language is off. No, you produced these shortages. Yes, baby, you produced these shortages when you look at your processes and your policies and your practices and your decision making. Okay, you and the discussions you have, the conversations you have behind these closed doors, you created these shortages, right? Because when you what is the empirical evidence for these so-called standards and criteria to the professional outcome, right? If I did research in the B channel and the X channel of Y channel as an undergraduate, where I don't even know my right from my left, I don't even know the difference between Fruit of the Loom and Hanes underwear, but you want to use that research to judge how good a doctor I'll be after I come into your medical school? Does that even make sense? So it's all the pieces of looking at these criteria, of asking ourselves the questions when we're in the rooms and people say certain words. This person isn't fit. Okay. I don't know if they're aligned with our mission. The kind of coded languages, really naming that and asking folks like, well, say more. Tell me more about what you mean. Making bias mitigation practices anti-racist practices, to bring it to the larger helm, right? Anti-white supremacist practices, explicit in our various organizations and committees and institutions and work groups and task forces and what have you, right? Is ensuring that people in white bodies that are about that life and want to be down and want to be about that life and cherish themselves as anti-racist are always every day doing the work of divesting from whiteness and white supremacism, right? And ensuring that we are identifying those institutional gatekeeping practices that exclude rather than invite, include, celebrating various features and characteristics of learners and trainees and applicants and candidates and what have you as strengths, as assets. We need you. Yes, I know you're first generation and you come from a place, of poverty, and you just, you work 3 jobs while trying to put yourself through school. That kind of drive, that kind of motivation, those kind of skill set, that attitude, the empathy and compassion a person like that generates. Baby, we need doctors like that. We need nurses like that. We need pharmacists like that. We need dentists like that. We need veterinarians like that. We need on and on folks like that. We need people in these professional context like that. Yes, but I got a 20 in my MCAT. Fuck the MCAT. Okay, right? Because at the end of the day, we still haven't found the linkage between that score and how awesome a doctor you are at the end of the road. So we're just like, we don't even know what that is about. So there's a lot of conversations when we talk about these bias breakers. Read Dr. Nakae's article. It is posted to the dashboard. Allow it to invite you to do further reading and further podcast watching and further just your own self driven development, okay, inside of how we got here in the first place. Sister Lana taught us about the difference between bias and discrimination. Now, understanding again, bias plus power equals oppression, and oppression can look like, one of the ways it looks like is discriminatory practices, and that's essentially what we are doing, is discriminating. And why it's important to people that those words aren't used are tied to accountability inside of litigation. And so if you don't mitigate, baby, we will litigate. All right. Because when we don't have the stick with the carrot, what we help people do is just eat carrots. In other words, we are helping them prepare a salad, a chef salad with ranch dressing and croutons on the side. So with that being said, thank you so much, everyone, for taking time to be here today. All right. And we're going to do a deep breathing. Again, given what happened, I went down. It's more for me, and you are welcome to join in it. And just a deep breathing exercise. And then I'll just play a very short affirmations. And you are welcome to listen. You don't have to. We're already closing at this time. But we will end with some deep breathing. Remember that AMART, we are here pretty much almost all Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern time. You can watch this on our website, on our YouTube channel, and please sign into, join the directory, join the community with your information. It's all on this, the first attachment to the dashboard or the tweet. All right. We will not be on next week because of the turkey holiday. All right. We will not be on next week because of the turkey holiday. We will not be on December 24th and 31st because of Christmas and New Year's. Okay. So the next time we'll be back is December 3rd, 10 and 17. But then we will not be on 24 and 31 because of the holidays, just so you know. And so with that being said, let us go ahead and just take a minute to breathe. And let's, wherever you are, just invite you to relax yourself. If you're seated down, if you're lying down, if you're standing, or whatever you're doing. If it's safe, close your eyes. If it's not, please do not. You're driving, please drive with both eyes open. But what we're going to do is just sort of take a moment to ground ourselves, feel the earth or the surface beneath your body. Just kind of feel that for a second. Let your eyes close if it's safe. Let your shoulders close as well. And then we're going to take a deep breath through our nose deeply and fill your chest with that life-giving air. And then blow out really slow. We're going to take another deep one. You want to feel your whole chest, feel your diaphragm fall and your tummy rise through your nose. And slowly, slowly, like a balloon deflating, blow out through your mouth. One more time, breathing deeply through your nose, that life-giving, life-affirming air. Breathe in joy, breathe in love, breathe in peace, breathe in prosperity, breathe in growth, breathe in happiness, breathe in family, breathe in community, every good thing. Breathe in birthday cake. Breathe in butterflies. Breathe in vacation. Breathe in your favorite things. And then slowly breathe out. You're breathing out fear. You're breathing out lack of trust. You're breathing out scarcity. You're breathing out lack. You're breathing out illness. You're breathing out pain. You're breathing out sorrow. You're breathing out confusion. You're breathing out uncertainty. Now just let your body breathe. Just return to its natural rhythm. Natural rhythm. I want to wish you loving, powerful community. Make sure that you love yourself. You love each other. You build community and build power. I'm going to end the broadcast for the live stream. Bye, y'all. And